Ask him. Hey, Marcy. Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I apologize. We are starting a little bit later than planned. We wanted to make sure everybody had time to get here with traffic and everything. But this is our second meeting of the House Study Committee on Disaster Mitigation and Resilience. We unfortunately had to postpone our last meeting to now, but I'm thankful to be able to get back down here to Savannah, and I appreciate everybody here coming out and taking an interest in this very timely discussion that we're having. Before we get started, I'd like to ask Chair Lady Lynn Smith if she would open us in a word of prayer, please.
Please bow your heads in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day. We seek your blessings upon us as we deliberate the difficult issues of disaster mitigation and how we as people can play our role in your name. And we ask your blessing upon this committee. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to go through and introduce ourselves, and I'll start with myself for those who I haven't met yet and those watching online. I'm Clint Crow. I'm the chairman of the study committee. I represent House District 118, which consists of all of Butts County, portions of Newton County, and portions of Monroe County. And I'm very thankful to be in this position and to be able to engage in this discussion. And I'll have Representative Smith go next, and then Representative Jackson is going to give us a little special introduction. So.
Good morning. I'm Representative Lynn Smith. My home is Noonan, Georgia. I represent parts of Coweta County and a part of Carroll County. And I chair House Natural Resource and Environment Committee, and I'm honored to serve with you today and to hear from the people who are very, very worried and concerned about our natural disaster issues.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Jackson.
Good morning. First, let me welcome everybody here to the hostess city of the South. Savannah, Tybee, all of the areas that are surrounding the water. We're just it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm glad we were able to reset this meeting to bring us all together. I represent the 165th District, which includes Thunderbolt. I have the whole west side of the city, the downtown area, all of the waterways going down Savannah River. And in order to do this, you know how we are lowland here in this area, and we're very concerned about what can be done here in this community. I also serve on higher education and a couple of other committees within the legislature. Again, it's a pleasure to have you, and I know we are going to accomplish an awful lot here today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for being such a gracious host here in the city of Savannah. Obviously, we're I believe we all know why we're here, but it's become much more impactful and timely now with the storms we've had come through this year. When this legislation for the study committee was introduced back in March, uh, I knew it was important then, and everybody else believed that it was important. That's why we were able to get it passed. But I don't think anybody could foresee just how important these conversations are going to be now. But it's been given an extra level of importance given recent events, and we now are able to have some real-time information on things that went well, things that didn't go well, things that we can do better, and ultimately ways that we can protect people and property, ultimately save lives. That's my goal, is to help save lives and protect property. And so that's I think we'll be able to get some real good information. And again, I just really am thankful for all the presenters that have an interest in this and coming out and talking to us. And with that, with time being of the essence, we will get started. And our first presenter will be Jackie Jackson, the Resilience Program Administrator with Chatham County, and I guess Dennis Jones maybe as well. Are you being Dennis? Y'all come on up. Thank y'all. Well, I'm glad she did. So.
As Jackie's getting set up, one thing that I think is important for everyone in the room to understand, while we all know what resiliency is, we all know what hazard mitigation is, I think from the general public, it's a hard concept to understand. When you say resiliency and mitigation, it's not something that they are familiar with, terms that they are familiar with. So it's a little hard for them to really grasp what resiliency and what hazard mitigation means from a disaster standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So we take a concerted effort to ensure that we are trying our best to make sure that we are communicating that in an effective manner. It not only helps us at a local level, but a state and a national level, as we can really define what that means to an individual.
Thank you. And one thing, sorry, right before you start, and I appreciate those comments. Anybody who is, if you are talking and presenting or adding something, try to get real close to one of these microphones, just because this is being live streamed and recorded for, it will be there forever, so you can go back and watch it back, and it can't pick it up online unless we have one of these mics. So no, but I appreciate your comments very much, and I didn't give you one. I should have had one sitting over there for you.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Are you able to hear me okay? I usually am not told I'm a quiet person, so don't worry about that.
Same, yeah.
And again, thank you all for coming to Savannah. We appreciate you bringing the winter weather with you very much. So good to see you all again. And as Dennis mentioned, as was mentioned, we are here today to talk a little bit about, as you know, resilience and some of the outcomes recently of honestly the disasters that we've faced here in Chatham County and what that means for us locally. I do want to just kind of, for reference, set the tone with regards to Chatham County specifically, how we look currently, how we've looked in the past, and then some of the efforts that we have going on locally with regards to the impacts and resilience as a whole. For those who may not be as familiar as Mayor Jackson is with our wonderful county, Chatham County is a little over 400 square miles, right at 433 square miles, and we've got 9 jurisdictions in this community. So that's a lot of players to bring to the table at one time when we're talking about resilience as a whole. We've included a graph up here just for reference, looking at our population and the population growth of Chatham County over time, and you will see a dramatic increase. And this is continuing to go up. Again, this last number is at 2022. This is not including what we'll talk about, a little bit of Hyundai growth and that type of thing as well. But we are projected to see a steady increase. Again, this is before Hyundai, of another 73,000 people just within Chatham, and this over the next 40 some odd years, that's going to be dramatically increased, as we know, up to roughly 373,000 people, over the next number of years. So all of that being said, that population increase is something we are really staying abreast of, are intricately involved with, and some of those development pressures that, again, you're very familiar with. Hyundai, a large project that obviously you're familiar with regards to the largest economic development project in the state. Again, 8,500 new jobs to the local Chatham, Bryan, Effingham area. Georgia Ports Authority is directly located in Chatham County in Garden City, a small community, and it's the 4th busiest port in the United States. And that puts us right behind Los Angeles and New York. For perspective, a community of 300,000 people has the 4th busiest port in the United States. So again, taking all that into account. With that, there's been related warehouse space development, over 100 million square feet of development directly related to warehousing for all those needs related to the port. And again, as I kind of mentioned, another 21% projection in growth for this direct area in the coastal Georgia area. I'm going to turn it over to Dennis for this.
So this is a good slide to help paint the picture of what our real-time data looks like. So this graphic that you see up here on the screen, this is just 2023 alone, just 2023. And this is representing all of the billion-dollar weather-related events that have occurred throughout the United States in 2023. And there's 28 different billion-dollar weather-related events. You'll see a lot of them are right there along the central U.S., of course, Florida, the New England states, and surprisingly, there's really only a few out on the West Coast. So you see the East Coast, the central United States are being what I consider plagued by severe weather events costing millions and billions of dollars, as you can see here. A lot of that is directly associated with population increase. You know, Jackie just mentioned about the steady incline of density, not only in Chatham County, but it's occurring throughout the nation. And that exasperates this billion-dollar disaster graphic here. So it's very important that we understand that this is real-time data, again, from 2023. In Chatham County specifically, since 2000, we've had 21 named storms come within 50 miles of Chatham County. So that's just since 2020, or I'm sorry, 2000. The most recent was Debbie. Helene, which many of you are familiar with, that not only affected Chatham County, but the entire state of Georgia into North Carolina, South Carolina, portions of Tennessee as well, which, you know, prior to about 10 years ago, that's unheard of. That's unheard of a hurricane or a tropical storm affecting communities that far inland. But Asheville had significant flooding associated with it, probably the worst associated with that particular storm with Helene. And we even had some smaller communities that were, unfortunately, just simply wiped off the map. So they've got to totally rebuild if they decide to do that at all. It's very, very prevalent, and it has steadily increased over the last several years. So again, Helene was not included in this particular graphic because it didn't specifically meet the criteria of the center of circulation coming within 50 miles of Chatham County. So as far as sea level rise, we wanted to show you real-time data. You know, there's a lot of opinions about sea level rise. We wanted to get away from the subjectivity of it and actually show you a graphic of one of the tide level sensors that we have here out at Fort Pulaski. So you can see, going back to 1935, there has been a steady increase of sea level rise throughout our community at that particular gauge. This goes all the way to 2021. It has steadily increased since then. We are seeing flooding events occurring on a more frequent basis and at a more extreme level. We just had one not too long ago that wasn't associated with a tropical storm or a hurricane. It was associated with a tide regarding where the moon is in circulation around the Earth, its orbit around the Earth, and its full moon cycle. So it caused significant flooding throughout our community. It created isolation issues going out to Tybee Island. It created isolation issues going out to Burnside Island, where those people were actually cut off from any type of emergency response or ingress or egress for that particular event. You wanted to mention something else about this?
I think it's with regards to the sea level trends, what these trends have started showing us, and we've been recently notified to a certain extent out of reports, is that Chatham, I'm writing this down, we're at a higher rate of these sea level trends than even Miami and Charleston. And that kind of puts it in perspective with this is a very local impact, and this will continue to rise. So that, of course, is part of our conversation today.
And Ms. Jackson, earlier you had mentioned we are considered a low area. We are the low country. You'll hear this area referred to as the low country. So this is an example of some of the impacts that we're having regarding sea level rise. This is a graphic of Fort Pulaski, Fort Jackson, I'm sorry, that actually shows you what some of those impacts are. And this is associated with a king tide or just an astronomical high tide. We didn't have this before. So as sea level continues to rise, we're seeing impacts not only at our historical sites, but into our communities as well. You want to expand on that?
Sure. And just for reference, this is from November of 2021. And again, this particular scenario was not associated with a named storm or anything like that. We just had that perfect, I guess everything aligned where we had heavy winds pushing those tides in, and this is the after effect as well. Again, we're going to start to see more and more of this, unfortunately.
Minor flooding versus. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, we're going to tag team in as we said. But we wanted to start including and setting a baseline for you, and so you could kind of see what minor flooding, moderate, and extreme major flooding is. I'll let Dennis expand on this a little bit, but we have certain thresholds established by the National Weather Service as to what those definitions are. Minor flooding is that minimal or no property damage, but some inconvenience. The picture on the left is Highway 80 heading out to Tybee, as you might be familiar. And then moderate flooding is that some inundation of structures and roads near those streams. This again is in Chatham County out towards 204, pushing out along the Ogeechee River. And of course, this entire roadway system is closed off due to flooding.
And what's important to understand is going out to Tybee Island, Highway 80 out to Tybee Island, our alerting threshold when it comes to informing people about the minor flooding was around 10.8 feet. When we had a tide of about 10.8 feet, we would advertise to our community that we could have some localized coastal flooding. Several years ago, there was an effort to actually elevate the road going out to Tybee slightly. That allowed us to adjust our threshold up to 10.3 feet. So when a tide reaches 10.3, we start alerting everybody. Because of sea level rise, we now had to adjust that down to 10.1 feet. So it's starting to encroach into Tybee Island. And I would anticipate that we're going to have to even lower that even more. So as mitigation efforts are taken to actually account for whatever's happening at that particular time and historic, we got to also plan for the future too, making sure that any of our mitigation efforts are looking at 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So again, some more graphics here on major flooding. We explained minor, moderate. This is major flooding associated with, this was Hurricane Debbie that came through. And Hurricane Debbie actually created record level flooding in Chatham County. We set a record for Debbie. And a lot of it was not because of the impacts at the time of the storm. Most of this flooding came after the fact. Debbie went further inland, and then all that water that dumped in the state of Georgia has to make its way to the coast. So a lot of this flooding was after Debbie had already left the area, and it affected areas north and west of us, and then all that water came down, flooded the Ogeechee River, and caused us significant flooding from Hurricane Debbie. We actually lost 22 structures identified as destroyed from the aftermath of Hurricane Debbie.
Let's see. Let me go back just one. As we start to, discuss a little bit further, you're going to see more of those specific, or presenting and talking about more of those specific impacts that we are really, really starting to focus on here locally in Chatham. And one of those are all these flooding events and higher water tables. impacting our wastewater systems. We have a great deal, especially in unincorporated Chatham County that we represent, a great deal of homeowners that are still on septic systems. Publicly, Chatham County, unincorporated Chatham, does not operate water systems or wastewater systems. So most of our residents are on septics and private wells. So what we're now seeing, unfortunately, as you can kind of see from the graph, what that shows you are some of those hot spots where we are starting to see failing septic systems, where homeowners are, it's backing up into their homes, or they're not able to flush their toilets, honestly, during heavy rainfall events when those grounds are getting saturated. So this is going to be an ongoing effort. We're diving really deep into this as to what this is, what are our next steps with regards to that. Another discussion is extreme heat. We have started to see more and more of these scenarios. You're very familiar with that. This is becoming one of the deadliest phenomenons, as you can see in U.S. history as a track. Dennis may want to add to this, but I've included, just an excerpt where we have homeowners who limited budgets. They can't necessarily run air conditioning all the time, and unfortunately we've had folks that have passed away in their homes because they are having to figure out how do they pay for electricity versus medicine and all these other type of things. So this has become a real concern. We are actively working within all the jurisdictions in Tybee, I don't know why that came out, in Chatham, with regards to heat scenarios, heat exercises, heat plans, those type of things. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, prior to about 10 years ago, we didn't have a heat-related plan, how to handle heat-related emergencies, because it wasn't as prevalent as it is today. Since then, since about 12 years ago, we instituted a heating and cooling strategy for Chatham County. City of Savannah has one as well. And since that time, we've had to execute that plan half a dozen times. Last year alone, we had to exercise it twice. So we are seeing more and more the need to do that, not only because of the aging population, but it's because of the infrastructure not being able to keep up with the population growth and the density that's being created. So we are seeing more and more frequent exercises as well as implementation of our heat-related emergency plan.
So taking all of this into account, and kind of while we're here today, Chatham County just almost 2.5, 3 years ago, stood up its first resilience program, first department within the county, and that's what I oversee as well. But we are embedded in every single, as you can imagine, department. So our first conversation is, what is resilience to Chatham County? It may be a different opinion, a different outlook, et cetera, mission than other communities. And we see resilience as really an overlaying umbrella. As you can see, we have instituted a framework, and through that framework, we have 4 main themes. It's everything from infrastructure to our leadership, policies, those type of things, to health and well-being and economic and society. Can't talk today. But what this really shows, and we're going to start delving into it a little bit, is that all these things are interrelated. When you impact one, you're impacting the other. When you assist one, you're assisting the other. So you have to take that big picture approach with regards to talking about your community as a whole. So with that, I was going to really kind of dive in and highlight some of the programs and efforts we've instituted in the past couple of years. Since coming on board, I just went full force into trying to, as you can imagine, all the funding that started to come down through the federal government. There was a lot of dollars out there, and we were, to a certain extent, with the resilience program, really starting with a fresh view to see what we could implement. Some of those we were the very first in state of Georgia in 2022, are the only community in 2022. We got a BRIC award to get technical assistance from FEMA, and with that program, we have been able to, we like to call it one Chatham approach. It's not just unincorporated Chatham. We have brought City of Savannah to the table, Tybee to the table, other communities within Chatham to let's see how we can make get the most bang for our buck, really. Also looking at we have, as you are aware, we have a large military population here in Chatham County and neighboring Hinesville, Fort Stewart and Hunter Airfield here locally as well. We have really expanded an already existing partnership, but I think really grown that partnership in a great way. Just recently, we're notified that we received funding under Old CC, which is the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, say that once or twice, via the Department of Defense. And this is going to allow us to work with the University of Georgia and other strong partners to really look at evaluating our flooding around these military installations, our transportation into and out of these military installations, and then looking at housing. Housing with regards to this is something that you can't, look at in a silo. We know that 70% of our military at these installations live off base. That's our community, and we have to ensure not only that they have housing and can get to work, but that our own residents have housing as well. So we have just started that project. We're getting that underway with a number of partners, as I mentioned. Also working with Fort Stewart and Hunter Army Airfield. One of our strong, what we really want to grow approaches to resilience is property acquisition and conservation. Again, looking at, we know we're a growing community. There's a lot of room where density could go, but there are also areas that will provide a strong buffer for storms. These particular areas that we're looking at, you can see Hunter Airfield in the top up there. They're working with us on purchasing Pettigaw Island, which is on here down in the middle. We are also actively working within Chatham County to purchase Green Island solely for conservation. But what's important to know about these areas is not just for storm mitigation and storm buffers, but these areas also fall within our drinking water system, the water tables over those. So by keeping these conserved, we're also looking at protection of our drinking water systems, which is critical for this area, and again, additional resilience as well. And then the intent is that they will all remain within Chatham County oversight, and it's going to become public access for our residents. Some folks have never been, on a forested island via kayak or canoe or boat and that type of thing. So this is going to be overseen under our Parks and Recreation Department and as another resource for the community as well. It's also important to note that something that we are, again, looking at, as I mentioned, is that heat mitigation point and that stormwater mitigation point. If you keep these areas preserved, it's going to soak up a lot of rainwater and it's going to collect a lot of heat for this community in a good way. We are actively, in the past year, starting a solar program within Chatham County. City of Savannah has made some wonderful strides, and honestly, we've learned a lot from City of Savannah. So we have now instituted our first solar program on our municipal facilities to try and ensure that in times of need, that they're, one, using less electricity, but ultimately if we need these resources, they will be able to operate after a storm through battery backup and that type of thing. So we're looking at potentially a capacity of more than 1.3 megawatts. And this is just with 4 sites. We're now looking at adding an additional 11 sites, all on our Parks and Rec facilities, courthouses, those type of things. As well. And being good stewards of our residents, our taxpayers, we're looking at saving hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. But something that I like to point out, and this is again looking at resilience for the entire community, is we have implemented what we term is under our Shine On program. And this is a workforce development program. It's also a second chance program for those who might have had previous, history with the law per se, even felons and that type of thing. We're putting them back to work in a job market that's definitely growing. And we want them to stay here and work here within our community. So this has been a great, great effort so far. Our biggest site that we just finished was our sheriff's department or our jail. So it can be done anywhere and it's working really great. And all of our systems held up through these last 3 storms. And I really try to promote that because that's typically your first question, right? Like, can it handle a hurricane? Well, yes, it can. And we did really great. A major effort, again, looking at resilience, is electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure planning. We've got a strong partnership with Georgia Power, having some strong conversations about what that needs to look like with regards to the infrastructure. We just recently got a grant from the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission to look at an EV and a plan for that, where that needs to be. But what's important to note with this is we are looking at evacuation routes as well. And that becomes critical, and it came to life, if you will, during the last evacuation from Florida. We had folks who needed to charge their vehicles, and where do they go, and how does it, that systematic approach to letting them know. So it becomes a real world scenario that we need to think about. So we're looking at planning for that as well, and it becomes something that the entire community can benefit from. Do you want to add anything? Sorry. Lastly, this is something that we're really trying to, honestly, we're trying to work on getting funds for this, and I'm sure you've heard the terminology resilience hubs in other communities and across the U.S. actually. We haven't always looked at it as a quote-unquote resilience hub, but we know what we've tried to implement, and now there's a term for it. We have just obtained funding to buy a piece of property, and we're trying to expand the idea of one location in a community of need where they can go to, where there will be power, there will be internet, there will be resources there, and programs during those blue sky days. So this would be, in essence, a community center when it's not in use as a resource during or after a storm event. So there's a lot of resources that could be there. We're looking at mobile medical units, computers to take GED classes, those type of things, really senior programs, all of those things. But in times of need, it then is able to stand up as your resilience hub where you go to during a tornado if you need to quickly get shelter. These particular systems are rated for hurricanes and tornadoes as well. So we're talking strong structures. And we're trying to get our first one, and then replicate that throughout the county, because we don't have tornado shelters here locally, and we're seeing more and more tornadoes as well. Anything on that you want to add? No? Okay. I wanted to highlight, and in my opinion, as a planner, kind of coming from that world, codes and ordinances are the foundation of everything. We're looking at, we obtained a grant, thankfully, and she'll be speaking later, but from Department of Natural Resources, a coastal incentive grant, and it is solely to look at our codes and ordinances and see what are we missing, where are there rooms for improvement, where are there roadblocks that we might not be speaking the same language. And this is an effort, it's a very large one. We're in the first year, finishing up our first year. But we are including both unincorporated Chatham County and the city of Savannah in this endeavor. And by that, you're really capturing a large part of this population. But looking at everything from tree ordinances, where and how we want them placed, to infrastructure, renewable energy, everything that you can see here and more. As I mentioned, septic systems, what are we going to do about wastewater, that type of thing. All of this is inclusive of this grant. So I'm really looking forward to this and what those outcomes, and they're going to give us actionable next steps, as well as changes to the actual ordinances. And we've got a lot of communities that we've been working with and talking to help us with that process. Lastly, and I promise this is kind of the end, this is a lot of information in one slide, but what we wanted you to know is, at least from the resilience side, this is only like a couple things that we've been working on. But when you're talking about disaster recovery and preparations and resilience, you've got to, again, look at all those 4 themes that I talked about and really hit every single one. We're working in the world of housing. Do we need more housing? We need stronger housing, right? To stand up, et cetera. Tree canopy expansion, but also in the right place, all these kind of things. And again, just standing up this program, of course, was a first piece of that as well. But again, I've mentioned a lot of those up there, but they're all inclusive of this bigger picture for Chatham, just what resilience looks like for us as well.
I want to circle back around to what I said in the beginning. A lot of the citizens don't really understand the level of effort it takes to have an effective resiliency program, an effective hazard mitigation program. There are some very complicated topics up here. Our effort at an emergency management agency is to try and convey that to the general public to make sure they have an awareness of what the county is doing. While Jackie works at a macro level, we try and work at a micro level, really get down to that individual to explain some of these concepts, to explain why resiliency is important, to explain why hazard mitigation is important, and to ensure that they understand that not only the county, but the city, the state, as well as the federal government is working in their best interest to ensure that they have the services that they need when they need them, and to ensure that they are as prepared as possible. So our focus is to reach one person every time we go out and offer a presentation, because if we can reach that one person and we can make one person more resilient, overall we'll be a much more resilient community.
Thank you all very much.
In a short amount of time.
That was a lot in a short amount of time. That's very informative, though. Thank you very much. We'll start with questions from the committee. Either of you have questions?
Yes,
And I do too.
Okay.
I'll yield.
Okay. Chairlady Smith.
Oh, pardon. First of all, that was very impressive, y'all. My goodness, a lot of work. Driven by necessity, obviously. One of the things I've witnessed throughout the years are different parts of our country, the Chesapeake Bay area, what they're trying to do, the New Orleans area, and Baton Rouge seeing themselves as eventually being a port city. So what you're doing now, are you interacting with other areas? Because one of the things I've noticed how hard that decision is to remove a property owner from their land, because you will no longer send them emergency service. You will no longer. So those are the hard face-to-face decisions, and I don't know how to make it any easier, but I've noticed that that is what holds back most decisions when it's time to say we've got to do this. And so any insight on that?
Yes, ma'am. As we were looking at developing the resiliency program in Chatham County, we brought in people who have really good resiliency programs. We brought in people from the Keys. They have a really good resiliency program in Monroe County. We solicited input from North Carolina. We solicited input from Tennessee. So we looked at some of the best practices throughout the community. That's how we structured our resiliency program. From there, for every disaster that happens throughout the U.S., those 28 that I mentioned, my staff is constantly looking at what worked, what didn't work, how can we incorporate that here in Chatham County, not only from a response side, but also looking at their long-term efforts in hazard mitigation and resiliency, and trying to learn from the experiences of others. So we take a concerted effort to ensure that we're looking out throughout the rest of the nation, trying to find out what is relevant for Chatham County and bringing those here for us. The program's only in its infancy and been in place for about 2 years now, so we're still learning, but it's happening everywhere. And as much as we can learn from a community who has experienced similar things that we could experience, we want to try and do that. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. What we're doing here is not new to Chatham. It's new to Chatham County, but it's not new to resiliency or hazard mitigation. So we want to try and learn from others.
And if I may just add to that, I think as well, as Dennis mentioned, it's an ongoing effort to have those communications. I'm definitely part of a strong network, and it's these conversations every single day throughout all of the Southeast, as well as New Jersey, California, et cetera. I will say in what we felt was a starting solid kind of conversation was that codes and ordinances. Really looking at that and see, as a first step, where can we make improvements on those? Strengthen our building code, strengthen some of those ordinances. But to your point, those are tough conversations to very much have at the local level. I don't know that we're at that point yet, to be honest. And that's why we're trying to build everything and have that. But we're working, our elected officials are definitely aware of that conversation. I don't think we're ready to be that aggressive per se. However, as storms happen more and more, it may just happen on its own to a certain extent.
Right, right. Ms. Chair, one more. It's
Sure.
just the, so again, I'm very impressed with what y'all have done. I've found that what limits most decisions is how to do relocation. And I don't have the answer, but I know it's an overarching problem for any group that tries to deal with resiliency and disaster mitigation. So
We do have, as you probably are aware of, Chatham County is under our community rating system, which is your floodplain management and that type of thing. There is a property buyout program after repetitive loss, meaning they've been inundated a number of times, that type of thing. But it is on the owners. They can
Right,
decide.
right. Still America,
Right. Again, I don't think we're ready for that aggressive next step. We're trying to get all of our ducks in a row and see if there's some fundamental baseline information and changes that we can make. And
No,
that's kind of how we're moving, I
right.
think. But
No, I'm impressed very much so with what
There
y'all
are
doing.
alternatives to relocation, and you'll see some of that as you tour Tybee this afternoon. After some major flooding events, after Matthew and Irma, we started offering a property elevation program. So you'll see that as you go out in Tybee. They'll point out some of the houses that have been elevated. Those are the property owners who chose not to relocate or not to sell out, but to actually elevate their property, and Tybee's a good example of that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. All right, Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I enjoyed what you said here in the report, but I do have a couple of questions that I would like to ask, particularly those that align my area here in the city of Savannah, my colleague's area who's here. This is Representative Ann Westbrook, if you don't mind me.
No, I was going to introduce her when we got to the stop point, and welcome. Yeah, we do have a special guest, Representative Ann Allen Westbrook from here in the city of Savannah. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
So.
I'm concerned because part of my district is right on the water, a lot of it, as I said earlier. But there are several things. We are a city of a lot of students coming in. We have SCAD, we have Georgia Southern, Armstrong, and particularly Savannah State University that sits right on the water. And as you can determine, it's built right on the water. It was really an island. And as I look at it and what is happening when these rainstorms come in, it's very devastating, and particularly the last one. The students, I have pictures of the students having to move out, their cars being flooded, and most of these kids have never experienced this kind of fear. They were very frightful, but I can really give the city of Savannah and Thunderbolt a lot of thanks for the things that they did. But I do think, as you talked about the various areas, like the military involvement, we also have to look at those that are coming in from all over the world. The other thing is, I'm glad to hear you have a training program, and I do feel that more and more of this information should get out into the community. As you know, Savannah is a community of many community centers. And when you are talking about where can people go, what can they do, they're a little highland than some of the areas that are surrounding the water. Now, even though I'm not, my district does not involve Tybee Island, but coming in and off of Tybee, one way, I think that we need to address those kinds of issues. I don't know if it comes under our purview or what. It's very devastating, because when that tide rises and people are not going to leave, they will still try, and the flooding, happens. The other thing is that the houses that are being built now, the new houses, particularly those that are being built along I-16 and what have you, are the codes are being applied to them because it's low. The I-16 is higher and they fall down, and a lot of the flooding. I can tell you, the two of us drove around the community. We couldn't get in some of the communities that had never flooded before. So I think that one of the things that needs to be addressed is maybe it needs to be addressed through the cities or the county or what have you, or maybe someone, maybe that's why I'm on the committee.
Maybe,
Maybe so.
it could be. Maybe.
Am I on the, yeah, ask him. But maybe we need to see, because we are visual and we go, we do our duty that we have to do. And it's not getting better. I've been here a very long time, and it worries me. It's getting worse with all of this. We never have seen what happened in this last situation and the uprooting of trees and what have you in our communities, and communities that have never flooded now becoming the problem areas here in the area. So I know throughout what you're doing with Chatham County, the inner city, and then those where other things are being built and it's blocking whatever the waterways are. There are so many structures that are going up. Should there be some way that you have to address those issues, because it's pulling on the water system, other systems, lights, and all of that in our community? I think what you've done has been exceptional. This gives me a lot of information to deal with, here in our community as well.
Yes, ma'am. Very good questions, and thank you for asking those. I think some of the high-level infrastructure improvements that Ms. Jackson was talking about, this Ms. Jackson was talking about,
Namesake.
will certainly help with that. I think another thing that, as a state, I think that something that we could see some benefit from, Georgia's a home rule state. So when you get at a local level, you have all of the jurisdictions making their own determination about building codes. They meet the national, but then they can set their own building codes locally too. A prime example is Chatham County increased its freeboard requirement several years ago. We have not seen significant flooding on those properties where we have increased that freeboarding requirement. Some of the other municipalities haven't done that, so we've seen flooding in some of those. But if there could be a holistic look at, trying to consolidate that or trying to commonize that in a community so that you can go from one jurisdiction to the other and it's pretty much same. Whereas my house flooded, my house didn't. And some of that is related to some of those localized restrictions and rules and criteria being put in place.
I will definitely add to that. I agree 100%, which to your point is one of the main reasons we really wanted to look at our codes and ordinances first and include City of Savannah and the county together, because you're making one big punch at one time with the intent of bringing on the other jurisdictions as well.
That's
to
great.
Dennis's point, we for very, very long have been, we've kind of just all been doing our own thing within the departments and the jurisdictions, and we are seeing that effect with more and more density as well. But I agree, if we are able to strengthen some of these and make some really fundamental changes, and maybe not just at the local level, but what some of those requirements are from the state as well, it can only better the entire community, because we are 100% seeing more dramatic impacts on those individual kind of areas and communities that have just never seen that at all before, for
Right.
sure. Yes.
Thank you so much.
And I feel like there were a number of responses I had to all your points, but yes, I can't remember them all now.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. Just a couple of things. The one question I think we may have warned y'all, the presenters in our first meeting didn't really get a heads up. I think y'all may have been given a heads up. But the one question I always ask of each presenter is if there's one thing or a couple of things that you would like for us to see. I'm glad you pointed out, about home rule. And obviously we are trying to, the goal for us, or in my opinion, is we're trying to find best practices in different parts of the state and see where we can replicate those, maybe encourage that in other places. But we do have to balance that with each jurisdiction, be able to do what fits them. So, we don't always have a one-size-fits-all, but we're trying to find certain things that we can really implement now from a legislative standpoint that can make a difference, either statewide or in different communities. So if there's, one thing that you say, hey, this would be great if y'all did this, that would be, I'd love to hear that.
So, to that point, I want to back up for just a second. If it will let me. Sorry. I think kind of as we walked into this, walked into this world of resilience at first glance, my first thought was, I need a plan. I need a resilience plan. And resilience, as we mentioned, is a lot of things within Chatham: transportation, housing, land use, zoning, emergency management, everything. We do not currently have a plan, a resilience plan. I have been trying to obtain funding. I didn't start really with a budget. It was a new program, so I've been grabbing money left and right as possible. It hasn't, unfortunately, fit into any of the grants that I've applied for. I have definitely applied. But anyway, all that being said, a resilience plan, I think, is critical, because then you're working off those same goals and strategies that the community has adopted, has been vetted, and you're incorporating everything. I think that's fundamental. To that point, something locally, and I know I hit on this, but this is an extreme focus for Chatham County. Wastewater management for our community that does not have a wastewater treatment plant. And we are actively doing engineering studies of what are we going to do. Even though the county does not own a wastewater system, we do. It's a conversation: at what point does the local government become somewhat responsible if homeowners cannot flush their toilets? Health and safety, that type of thing. So this is my personal high priority. I don't know, what that means at the state level, but we are seeing active, and this is not just, I might say, just a Chatham County issue. This is happening U.S.-wide in coastal areas. And what does that look like? It's going to be different for every community, but this is an extreme concern for us. If we have to build a wastewater treatment plant, which is an option that we're looking at, you're talking 50 million plus, But what are the alternatives? People can't. It's just we've got to look at that. So this is a critical thing for me personally, and our program and our upper management. Our chairman, all of the board, is very aware of this need, and we're actively trying to set the pace as to what this looks like for Chatham County. What are our answers? We're not quite sure yet, to be honest.
And I think while Jackie's comments were very specific to Chatham, I think I have some comments that the committee could actually implement that could be a statewide benefit. The state requires a community to have an emergency operations plan. It requires a community to have a hazard mitigation plan. I think the next step in evolution is to require communities to have a resiliency plan, as Jackie mentioned. There are many models out there. You've got communities of a variety of different sizes, but we're all required to have at least those two plans. We're required through the Georgia Emergency Management Agency to have an EOP, an emergency operations plan, and a hazard mitigation plan in order to sustain any federal funding. I think a resiliency plan, it should be a requirement for all communities throughout the country. As a community deals with resiliency and hazard mitigation, there's varying levels of success. There's varying levels of plan development. We are well down the road on getting the framework for a resiliency program for Chatham County, and I believe Jackie showed a slide earlier where there's only one other community in the state that's actually working on resilience. But it's so important, and it ties directly to hazard mitigation, which is a required plan. But having that resiliency plan in place, I think that's low-hanging fruit, something that the state could require, and there'll have to be funding for those smaller communities to actually do that. But having a consultant come in and developing that resiliency program for that community, it just sets a framework. It sets a foundation for moving forward. And it ties directly to the hazard mitigation program. It also ties directly to any capital improvement programs the community has in place as well. In addition to that, we've seen, as the slide before mentioned, $28 billion disasters in the state of in the nation. So we're seeing emergency management as its own profession. In the state of Georgia, we have so many emergency managers who have 4 hats, 5 hats. They're the fire chief, police chief, they're the public works director. So when it comes to a disaster situation, they're going to be focused on their day-to-day job, which is fire, police, public works, whatever it may be, code enforcement. and their emergency management standpoint or their emergency management function is kind of secondary, third, and sometimes even fourth priority. So actually putting some emphasis on promoting emergency management as its own profession instead of a collateral duty. I think we could see throughout the country, especially throughout Georgia, we could see some dramatic improvements in resiliency and also hazard mitigation, as well as response and recovery. I think it has a significant effect, having people who are dedicated to that function rather than have somebody who it's a collateral duty and they'll get to it when they can.
I will add, just as going back just real quickly to the resilience plan discussion, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the comprehensive plan requirement under DCA for state of Georgia. That type of fundamental plan really should be a piece of this resilience conversation. Chatham, I oversaw the comp plan development for many, many years for Chatham and Savannah and the area. And there's a lot of topics that we would just, include in the resilience plan. However, the resilience effort needs to be even bigger than that. But that comprehensive plan process, timeline, involvement, everything really could be something that could mirror the or embed that resilience plan discussion because it's all included. Yeah. I knew you would be familiar with that.
May I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I know I talked about Chatham County, but as I was sitting here thinking, we really have to consider all of the waterway, all the way down to the Florida line, because Brunswick and those areas were very devastated by that. So I have to mention our sister cities because we all come together. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I will just say it's been a good partnership even with DNR at the table because they have really enabled us to have that resilience conversation and emergency management conversation along the entire Georgia coast as well, through the collaboratives and meetings and that type of thing as well.
All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your information, and thank you also for teeing up our next presenter, which is going to be Jennifer Klein, the coastal hazard
I didn't know
specialist
that, I promise.
from
really
the Georgia
didn't.
Department of Natural Resources. So that was a great segue. And while she's getting set up, a couple of things that I did want to mention that I wanted to mention earlier. Of course, we do want to welcome our special guest from here in Savannah, Ann Allen Westbrook, representative from here in Savannah. Thank you for taking the time out to come over and visit with us. It's good to see you. And also, as you may have noticed, there's a member of the committee who's not here. Chairman Jay Collins was unable to be down here. He had some things going on that he prevented him from being able to be here. So we regret not having him with us, but we are hopeful and believe he'll be able to be at our next meeting in Atlanta. So, and lastly, for those who are watching online, if you want to submit comment, we'd love to have public comment from anybody who's watching in person or online. You can submit those. You can email those to Michael, our policy analyst. It'll be Michael Satterfield. His email is Michael, Michael .Satterfield, Satterfield, @house.ga.gov. Michael.Satterfield @house.ga.gov. So if you want to submit some comments, if you have some input, we'd love to have all the input we can get. So please feel free to email those to us. And with that, Ms. Klein, if you are ready, we will move on to you. Thank you for being here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to Jackie and Dennis for teeing up my presentation. My name is Jennifer Klein. I am the Coastal Hazard Specialist with Georgia DNR's Coastal Resources Division, housed within our Coastal Management Program. If you're not familiar with coastal management programs, they are funded through NOAA's Coastal Zone Management Act. We are allocated funds because Georgia has an approved program. We were approved to the state in 1998. And so each year we get about $2.5 million from NOAA. Hopefully that continues to happen. And we pass through about half of those funds to academia working on some of these types of projects on our coast. They also get passed through to the local governments and small projects that they can work on to help with some of these projects as well. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that and our coverage area. So our area, because we are a coastal management program, we focus on the 11 coastal counties, the 6 ocean-facing counties, and then we go inland one tier because those 5 counties are tidally influenced counties as well. So this is our service area. And this is our mission statement. I also wanted to, I know Jackie and Dennis had a definition of resilience, so I wanted to tell you what our definition of resilience is. It is the ability of a community to adapt to changing conditions and withstand and recover from a societal, physical, economic, or ecological disruption while considering equity and inclusion. And so we've really tackled resiliency through a number of different ways through our coastal program, and I just want to step through some of those with you. Those aren't necessarily all response or recovery. Some of them are also longer term types of adaptation and mitigation steps. So one way was a project that we started a long time ago, back in about 2010, 2011. After Superstorm Sandy, we noted that there was no long-term recovery or redevelopment plan for Georgia as a state or for any of our coastal communities. And so we took it upon ourselves to use some of our funding and partner with GEMA on this effort. As we were starting to work on that in 2013, Governor Deal signed an executive order that GEMA and DNR would work on putting together this disaster recovery and redevelopment planning effort in the coastal counties. And then that the state would take what the coast had done and use it to do a statewide disaster recovery and redevelopment plan based on FEMA's National Disaster Recovery Framework. So in the beginning, we piloted Chatham County, and we also went to one of our more rural inland communities, which was Brantley County, because as you can imagine, Chatham County and Brantley County have very different capacities, very different stakeholders and issues, and we wanted to be able to highlight what some of those differences were. We also looked at, for Chatham County, we looked at sea level rise and shoreline change rates as well for future redevelopment. We then roped in Glenn County and the city of Brunswick, where they also looked at their water and wastewater infrastructure and some of their vulnerabilities as well. And over a period of time, we have been able to get disaster recovery and redevelopment plans in all 11 coastal counties, making us the first state to have a completely resilient coast based on FEMA's National Disaster Recovery Framework. These all exist in all of our counties. Some of them may not remember, but they have them, and they were all actually adopted in all of their communities except here in Chatham County. We then, while we were doing this, realized that so going through the process, it's extremely important that this is a whole community process, and so it is bringing together, you know, your blueberry farmers who are inland, your timber farmers. It's bringing in your fishermen, your shell fishermen for economic recovery. It's the health department, the hospitals, the schools. It's your whole community coming to do some of this planning. And we weren't getting a lot of input from small business owners. It only made sense because small business owners couldn't come to the meetings because if they stepped away, then they had to close their door and they were losing business. So working with our Department of Economic Opportunity, they kind of helped us pull together a guidance documents for those private sector small business owners. This was at the end of getting those 11 communities. The project was a total cost of about 2.1 million cash, while our local governments also provided about $455,000 in in-kind services. Throughout this time, we have had some of our challenges with storms. More specifically, within Matthew and Irma, we had a huge issue with marine debris. And so we've encouraged our communities to, when doing these plans, to enhance their recovery support function for natural and cultural resources to include marine debris. This was a challenge for us in Matthew and Irma because through the Coastal Zone Management Act, we are responsible for making sure that our marshes are clean. And there was a huge amount of marine debris in the marshes after these storms, but we didn't have any money to clean it up as a state. We didn't have any funds. And so we after Matthew, we got about 18 months after Matthew, we got about $650,000 from the governor's office that cleaned up Chatham County. And then after Irma, which was the very next year, we had another mess of marine debris. And we were able to get a grant from NOAA for another $650,000. That cleaned up about half of the marine debris that we had in our coastal marshes. And so it's been very difficult to be able to do that without having, the funds to be able to clean that up. And so we were able to work with our local governments when we did get some funds to clean that up, and our local governments were able to help with some of that disposal cost, because that was just the cost to get the vessels or the boat part or dock parts out of the marsh. And another recovery support function enhancement for these plans has been shoreline resiliency planning. As you can imagine, and you'll see, I'm sure, this afternoon on Tybee, when we have these storms come through, it's devastating to our shorelines. It's very difficult. And so working within Glenn County, they developed a shoreline management plan on things that they can do before a storm to make sure that their beaches are a little bit more resilient, and after the storm, and making sure that that stuff's included in a plan. It's extremely important. I hate that Dennis left, but it's extremely important when you're going after, say, FEMA dollars, that you have things already identified in a plan. If you want funding after the fact for resiliency has to be in a plan. It has to be in your hazard mitigation plan, a comprehensive plan, or you have to have adopted a disaster recovery and redevelopment plan. So some of the enhancements and additions also, our guidance document, it can be used anywhere in the state of Georgia. It is online. It doesn't just have to be for hurricanes. It can be for tornadoes. It can be for a train derailment. It can be for a chemical spill. So they can be used anywhere in the state of Georgia. We were very fortunate, not fortunate, it was a great opportunity when Hurricane Michael came through, that there were the 20 counties that were impacted in southwest Georgia. We worked with GEMA and DCA, and we were able to get a community development block grant disaster recovery to fund doing these disaster recovery and redevelopment plans in those 20 counties. And so they are currently underway as we speak. There's no money to do these in other parts of the state, but it would be wonderful if every county in the state had a disaster recovery and redevelopment plan. The plan is great. The process, I feel like, is even better, because it's educating everyone at the table and bringing your community together to talk about what's important and what is whole in their community. So those have been really good updates as well. And some other ways that we work through our office on resiliency is we have 7 licensed UAV pilots in our office. And so we'll go up and we'll do get aerial photography and imagery to see what things look like before a storm, so we know after the storm, and we can tell FEMA this really was an issue. We provide that technical assistance to our local governments. We've been doing stormwater culvert assessments. As you can imagine, a lot of them are clogged in our area. Number one, they don't allow fish passage, and number two, they cause more flooding. And sea level rise monitoring. And then you may have heard of some thin layer placement type of things that people have been trying here on the coast. I know, Ms. Smith, you've seen the site over on Jekyll before. And then, so nature-based infrastructure. It's fairly new here in Georgia compared to other states. We don't get a lot of permit applications to do nature-based solutions, but we'd really like to see people ask for living shorelines when they're more feasible than, say, a bulkhead here on the coast. It allows for less erosion. It absorbs wave energy when looking at resiliency. And so we have a specialist looking at some policy within that and how we work through in our program and how it can help to enforce our Coastal Zone Management Act as well. We also provide technical assistance on green growth and low impact development to our coastal communities. We have this guide here on enhancing coastal resilience with green infrastructure. We've done a couple of pilot projects, one on Tybee Island, one in Liberty County, to look at what's the cost benefit for using different building practices than standard building practices, and also how that helps offset some of the flooding and hazards that would be in an area. We developed a suite of high-risk model ordinances in this document as well. And I'm excited to say that Jekyll Island was the first to adopt a sea level rise ordinance used from this guidance document. And then just coastal hazards adaptation and mitigation. You heard Jackie and Dennis mention high tide flooding. High tide flooding has been a huge deal for us. Though high tide flooding is not mentioned in hazard mitigation plans, by the way. It's not considered an event. And so making sure that, our local governments are aware and start talking about this as an issue. NOAA predicts that, so we've seen 5 years ago, we would see 2 days a year of high tide flooding. Recently, we've been looking at between 5 to 7 days a year of high tide flooding. NOAA predicts that by 2050, we'll see about 75 days of high tide flooding in our area. Sorry, Tybee Island, you might have to close your road for 75 days a year. Oh my God. It's big. So it is something that we might want to consider as an actual event in planning. The other thing that's really huge that we have learned is literacy. Literacy with flooding literacy and literacy with resiliency. What we think as professionals in this field makes sense and we understand what it is doesn't necessarily mean that our constituents and the public understands what it is. And so we've worked really closely with a group of about 25 flooding professionals at the federal level, at the state level, and try to figure out what some of those terms are that make more sense. And so we have a list of about 72 terms on our website that we like to encourage our partners as well to use so that we have consistent terminology. We're all saying the same thing and that people understand when you say that you're at risk of, not necessarily is it a 1% flood, it is a 100-year flood. People don't understand those differences. And so really saying, the same thing. I work really closely with our state emergency management office. I sit on their state hazard mitigation planning update. I have provided them for the last 10 years with the sea level rise data and information. It is included in our state hazard mitigation plan, and it was signed by the governor in March. And just making sure that that stuff that we are used to here on the coast is included at a state level. And this QR code is a link to our flood literacy page if you want to take a snapshot. We also, in 2016, held the first Georgia Climate Conference here on the coast. Very proud of that. We held our second Coastal Climate Conference in 2021. when Miss Smith gave our keynote open, as well as the governor was very supportive. And so we're excited to say that our third climate conference is scheduled to be held October 20th and 21st on Jekyll Island, where we'll be talking about a lot of these long-term resiliency work. The resources. We provide resources and tools to these communities in the way of GIS maps. This is the City of Brunswick's sea level rise map. They we have been working with them to use that to potentially look at elevating one of the roads, Linear Boulevard, that they do. It floods during high tide flooding. It is the access point to their $15 million middle school. And acquiring some pieces of property that are in there that will help with flood mitigation as moving forward. Our coastal management program, we have a coastal incentive grant program that I mentioned, and since we have been deemed a program, we have given out over $4 million just in coastal resiliency work, and we anticipate more of that. This is probably one of my most exciting projects coming up. You all are familiar with the environmental leadership program that you all do, and we are using your curriculum to develop a local level resiliency academy. We are kicking that off in January. It is for elected officials. We really, in my 24 years with the department, I see so much turnover at the local level. It is so difficult to make sure that local elected officials at the local level stay abreast of what some of the issues are and the plans that they have and how that they can work together, the resources that they have access to. And so we are offering this program to our local elected officials beginning in January. Again, Representative Smith's going to be our keynote speaker. And so we're really excited to see that go. We're going to hope to continue that about once every 2 years to get that turnover when there might be a change in leadership. And I wanted to just mention, I feel like what you heard before me is like pie in the sky resiliency for a community. And it's wonderful. But we have a lot of communities that do not have the capacity that Chatham County has. And so we work really closely with those communities to make sure that they have what they need to be able to move forward. They don't have access to tools. They don't have access to maps. They don't know how to write a grant proposal. They don't know where there's access to funding. And so those are services that we provide to our 11 coastal counties. As you can imagine, you all are familiar with some of these challenges. I don't know that we have as many more skeptics, especially here on the coast, because we have tangible impacts that we see almost every day. And so these are just some of the things that we work really hard to overcome. And as I mentioned, I invite everyone to put it on your calendar, October 20th and 21st of 2025 is our next climate conference. Questions?
I'm sure we probably have some. Either of you have questions? You got a question?
No, I really don't. The only thing is, I thought our presentation was very good, and mostly I'm concerned with the selection of people that you want to be a part, particularly of the training area, that they be inclusive of residents that may not be officials, but they need to know this kind of information as well.
Yes, ma'am. We partner with a lot of our partners who are in here, work really closely with getting that information out to the residents, especially when there are projects in their area. We're working on, like I mentioned, the City of Brunswick. Mm-hmm. We have a really cool project right now with the city where we are working with the neighborhood, and mm-hmm. there is also they have a youth program. Mm-hmm. They call it YoPro. It's the Youth of Professionals. and they also are soccer players, and they are actually the ones telling the flooding story there for us. And so the resiliency, the reason we chose local elected officials for the Resiliency Academy is because we do provide training to staff, local government staff, and so they get a lot of this more than the elected officials do. And so that's kind of our tiered approach.
That's great.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Chair Lady Smith, do you have some questions?
First of all, thank you for your presentation. And this Coastal Resource Division is a part of the state agency that does a whole lot with a little bit of money. And so it's amazing everything you've been able to accomplish. And I believe you got, was it a B rating for at the national level? If you'll explain that. And then I got one more question.
Do you mean for the report card? So I probably can't even speak to it that much because I don't do it. But we started that about 10 years ago, and just looking at different parameters to what what our natural resources, and just kind of monitoring that every year. And so it comes out to about an A- or B+ almost consistently. Yeah.
Which is a couple more questions real quick.
Go ahead.
So you touched on something that I'm beginning to be aware of as a legislator, and that a lot of our counties who are able to produce the revenue they need to provide the services for the community, but we have an equal number of counties that have a very difficult time even with a standard report. So we've got a contrast there, and I'm not quite sure how we go about addressing that. That's one in front of us. And then the final question is, does the private sector influence at all where people build? In other words, so-and-so can't get insurance anymore. I mean, how does that play? Where does non-government moderators come into where people build and such as that?
That's a loaded question.
I'm just giving our chairman more work to do.
Thank you for that.
I mean, sure. I mean, especially in highly sought areas on our coast, I imagine that the private sector has a lot to say about where things can be built or not, even when there are local community ordinances or comprehensive plans in place. That can always be, influenced. So I'm not sure how that changes. I would say, so I am a one-person coastal hazards program.
It's amazing.
But I have a team of, not necessarily state agency team, but I have a team even in here, as Jackie mentioned, where we work together and saying, hey, what are you doing? And, how can this transfer to another community? When we do fund projects, we do require that the projects can be transferable to other communities. And so making sure that that they are, touched and able to get to that. Now, I think the hardest part is that we saw when there was such an influx of federal dollars that everybody wanted to go after those federal dollars these last couple of summers. That kept me up at night because I was trying to help them as well. And they, even so much as, outside of probably Chatham County, Camden County has a grant writer, and I don't know that any other county has a grant writer. And so you have to look at, they either have to pay a private consultant to write a grant for them, which is more money out of their pocket. And it's always a challenge.
Mr. Chairman, and I found that to be true in so many more rural parts of our state, and they have declining population and revenue, so they're less able to have resources to direct the problems that are before us. And that, again, goes to a Chatham County being able to manage if an interior county cannot manage. And so it's a long-term problem, and I'm not sure of the answer, but I know you talked about other resources. One of them is the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, and that's a not-for-profit group that is available to all of our governments. And I'm sure there are other groups that I'm not mentioning, but in that respect, we're fortunate. But the Coastal Resource Division does so much with so little support. So I just want to give you a shout out for what y'all do.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's, I'm going to ask you the one question, but we're going to save that for just a minute. There was a couple of things, there were a lot of things that you said that I thought were really impactful to me that I took note of. But one of the things that you mentioned was you talked about the plan that had been done, that everybody did, though a lot of them probably don't remember doing that. And I think that's one of the things that I found at different times in a previous life when I served in a different area. We would have something happen. Immediately following that, we had great plans. We had people who were there who had, immediate knowledge, personal knowledge of what went on. A few years down the road, when you have another disaster occur, those people are no longer there, and the plans that were made are filed somewhere in a cabinet that nobody knows where they are. So I thought that was very telling with the turnover, and I think it's one of the things that I hope to try to get out of this, is to have some way to try to keep that being in the forefront of the mind. Earlier when they mentioned the emergency operation plan, had a hazard mitigation plan, maybe requiring some sort of a resiliency plan, and have to have that updated every so often so that it's constantly forefront in your mind, might be something that we could do. But I wasn't aware of the support that y'all give with helping to plan that. But that's only for the 11 coastal counties, correct?
That's correct. That's
Through
just
your
for the
part.
11.
Okay.
Except for the disaster recovery and redevelopment plans that were done over in Southwest Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
But from your standpoint, that's for that, and then there's one over there, but nothing really statewide like that. But that might be something that
There
we
is a
could,
statewide disaster recovery and redevelopment plan. That's housed through GEMA.
okay.
Yep.
All right. And what would your one or two suggestions, wish list?
So I have, I would say number one is a state contingency fund, so that when we know these disasters are going to happen, probably more intense storms are going to be happening, that we can actively go and clean up our marshes and then get reimbursed for the funds that the state has spent by FEMA. I think that would be huge. And then just your continued support of our coastal management program.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Anybody else got anything? All right. Thank you. Appreciate you. All right. Next, we will have Kate Morano, Resilience Planning Director, Coastal Equity and Resilience Hub from Georgia Tech.
I do feel like we've covered pretty much everything I was going to cover.
Okay. But you may give it with a different flair, some more emphasis on different parts.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's okay, because as we go through, this, we're being mindful of time. I think we're doing pretty good right now, so.
Excellent. I will try to add a lot of flair to my presentation. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. Very exciting. And as the first two presentations did, I'm going to start with our own definition of resilience, which is, we're all kind of talking about the same thing, right? We're talking about a community's ability to adapt to changing conditions, to bounce back after a disaster strikes. And really, we like to think about building resilience as a kind of equation, if you will, being from Georgia Tech. On one hand, building resilience involves decreasing risk. So a community's exposure to hazards, their vulnerability to hazards, and then on the other hand, increasing their adaptive capacity, their ability to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves after a disaster, adapt to change, And really to build resilience, it involves doing both of those things, both reducing risk and increasing adaptive capacity. And with the Coastal Equity and Resilience Hub, we call it the SEER Hub, we really focus most of our work on the capacity side of this sort of equation. And I just want to point out that picture there on the right is just from a couple weeks ago, just a rainstorm. That was not an event. That was, I think, 2 weeks ago from today. We just had a crazy heavy rain event, and that's what community members here in Savannah are dealing with. And again, our billion-dollar disasters here in Georgia, we have experienced $133 billion disaster events since 1980 through to the first of this month. And to be clear, that does not mean Georgia has experienced $1 billion in loss from each of those events, but if the event had $1 billion in total losses across the country and impacted Georgia, it's included in that 133 number. We've had 10 this year so far. So we know that this is an issue, and we will continue to experience these events. The good news is that time and time again, studies have shown that resilience, investing in resilience, makes good financial sense. A study just this summer found that every dollar spent on resilience, on proactive resilience measures, on preparedness, saves $13 on the back end in economic impact, in damages, and in cleanup costs. So it pays to invest in resilience. It makes really good sense to do this kind of work and to be proactive and prepare on the front end. Shift gears a little bit and talk more about our specific work here on the coast. The motivation for the project that we call SEER Hub was really started back in 2016. We had Hurricane Matthew come up the coast, came at us from the business side, I like to say, came up the coast from the water, stayed over water the entire time as it was passing us on the coast as a Category 2 storm. And the tide gauge at Fort Pulaski, which you'll pass on your way out to Tybee Island today, measured its highest water level on record we're approaching 100 years now, 12.56 feet. We saw extensive flooding across the community. The bottom picture here is in Pooler, which is quite far inland. The next year we had Tropical Storm Irma, which came at us here on the coast. It was a backdoor storm, was a tropical storm by the time it was passing us. It was more of a rain event, and so we were expecting flooding, but we saw extensive flooding with that storm as well. And Fort Pulaski measured its second highest water level on record. The difference between those is only about 4 inches, but that really did not match the reality of the flooding that we saw on the ground. And so you may or may not know that tide gauge at Fort Pulaski is the only official NOAA tide gauge for the entire state of Georgia. And if it's not really telling the whole story of flooding on the ground here in Chatham County, it's certainly not telling the whole story of flooding on the ground across the coast. And so in 2018, Georgia Tech scientists partnered with folks from the city of Savannah and Chatham Emergency Management Agency to start the Smart Sea Level Sensors project. They installed a bunch of low-cost, internet-connected water level sensors on docks and bridges throughout the county to get a better idea of flooding in real time and to get a better idea, better understanding of how water moves throughout all of these marshes, all of these intricate waterways that we have here on the coast. And again, our goal is to provide that hyper-local, real-time water level data across the entire community, not just at that single point. In 2022, we officially created SEER Hub. We received some funding to expand our efforts both in subject and in geographic scope. So we are now working to install these sensors across the coast. We are also doing more of that capacity building, resilience planning that I mentioned earlier. We also have a K-12 education and workforce development piece of our project, and our goal now is to really work directly with communities to co-develop those tools, that knowledge, the strategies that are making our coastal communities more resilient. So expanding from just the technology to be more holistic about building resilience. And one thing that I think you've heard repeated in both presentations this morning is the sort of comprehensive idea, the complexity of resilience. It touches transportation, it touches codes, it touches housing, it touches economic development. It's a really complicated topic, and that means that it's going to take a whole bunch of people, a whole wealth of knowledge to really work to be successful in building resilience. And so we have partnered with a number of organizations on this project. We have myself and my colleagues at Georgia Tech. We work closely with the City of Savannah, the Sustainability Department, WorkSource Coastal. Brown University partners work exclusively on the modeling, which I'll talk about in a little bit, flood modeling. UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant work with colleagues of mine in the K-12 arm of Georgia Tech, as well as partners at Savannah State on education and workforce development. And then we have community partners, in particular here in Chatham County, the Pinpoint Betterment Association and Harambe House, which are both local nonprofits. And so I'll talk a little bit today about our environmental sensors and our decision support tools, and then and also our community planning efforts. As I said, so far we've deployed 71 sensors across the coast. Many of those sensors measure water level, but we've also expanded into temperature, rainfall, soil temperature. We are working with the school district in Effingham County to install a bunch of different sensors on their agri-center. They have a working farm. The Effingham School District owns a working farm, and so they are interested in sort of infusing this technology into their ag-related classes. We're working with them on that, and it's been a really successful partnership. And we are trying to get the data into the hands of communities to help support long-term planning efforts, to help support workforce development efforts, to help support K-12 STEM learning. And we are using that data, we are trying to use that data to develop these really advanced hydrological models that provide those high-resolution predictions of flooding on the ground across the coast. Turns out that it's really difficult to do. There's a reason that no one has really been successful at doing this thus far in this area, because it's a really complicated, complex hydrologic environment. And so, but we're really trying to build models that can forecast out, that can accurately predict flooding across the community in real time to support our local stakeholders, our local emergency managers, our local community members, our local urban planners in doing that resilience planning. We're also, along with this, building tools to help people access the data and to visualize the model forecasts. Shifting gears a little bit again to our resilience planning efforts and our community engagement efforts. We are working currently or have recently worked in a number of communities across the coast. I'll point out a few. In West Savannah and in Pinpoint, we are doing really great community-led resilience planning, and so we're working directly, like I said, with those community organizations. The Pinpoint Betterment Association has already implemented a number of projects that they identified as priorities in their community. They got funding through Sear Hub to to have a bunch of trees removed and pruned that were posing direct threats to structures, and that project finished up before the storms this year, which was great. They've also successfully petitioned the county to install speed bumps. Traffic calming was a big issue in their community. They are working with Jackie Jackson on flood mitigation and to improve the drainage in their community. They are doing really, really good work. And really all we've said was, we have funding here. Like, you know what these issues are. A phrase that we like to use in our work is the people closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. And so they know what the issues are and they know how to fix them. They just need funding and they need support. And I think that's really, to your point, what a lot of communities across the state need. They just don't have capacity to implement these projects. Similarly, in West Savannah, kind of the same deal. The West Savannah efforts are five or six neighborhoods coming together as a coalition to identify these projects and implement some of these projects. They are just now starting that. My colleague Jill Gamble, who is the executive director of Sear Hub, has worked on Tybee Island. You'll hear more about her work this afternoon with Alan to write their flood resiliency plan in 2016, their natural infrastructure master plan in 2023. She worked with Ashby, I believe, in St. Mary's on their flood resiliency project. We're also providing direct technical assistance to communities in Brunswick and on Sapelo Island. Sapelo is mostly like urban planning related support, and in Brunswick, we are collaborating with partners from Emory University on a health related study there. So lots going on across the state, or across the coast rather. All of it involves really deep community engagement and bringing in a broad coalition of partners. And so just to kind of summarize a little bit, I think the good thing about our approach, what we have found to be really critical is bringing community members to the table, supporting them in identifying and prioritizing and implementing what they have identified as what needs to happen, the issues that they have identified. I think another thing that we've been really successful in doing is bringing funding to coastal communities. Over the past year or so, we leveraged the initial funding that we received, which was $5 million, to generate an additional $20.48 million in funding. Much of that has come in the education sphere, which I didn't get into. I'm happy to talk offline about that. But we've been really successful in funneling funding, that's not easy to say, funneling funding to local communities here on the coast. And I think as far as the state is involved, I would echo a lot of what's been said earlier. There is funding out there that is available. So many communities don't have the capacity to apply for those dollars. They don't have the capacity to implement large-scale resilience projects. And I think where the state can play a role is in both supporting those communities, many of which are rural, smaller, don't have access to the resources, but also coordinating across the state. Sharing lessons learned and sharing tools and expertise could be really valuable. And so because I knew this question was coming, I'm prepared. As I said, the state can help these communities access funding that's already available. It's already out there. And I would imagine will continue to be out there. I think the state can also assist communities in coming up with some creative or innovative financing for these efforts. one of the things I think, Jennifer, you mentioned was local match is often required, and that can be an impediment for communities, even if they have capacity to apply for the funding and implement the funding. If they don't have the local match, that becomes a barrier. And so I think there's a role for the state. There could be a role for the state in that. My one recommendation would be to ensure that there is community participation on any kind of advisory board, any kind of conversations around the state's role. I really think, I mean, we work very closely with community partners, and I noticed that we don't have any in the room today, and I think that, I mean, that makes sense for this conversation, but their voices are critical, and their expertise is valuable, and so I think that they really need to be a part of the conversation. And that's all I got. Flair.
That was a fantastic, just the right amount of flair, actually.
Thank you. Thank you. I felt it too.
Yeah.
I felt it too.
All right. Questions?
Not questions, but I just want to compliment you on your presentation. And I think the final statement that you made, that there has to be community participation in all of this. And I noticed that in some cases they've talked about small businesses. There are now beginning to be small business organizations coming together, and their voice should be heard.
Absolutely.
I think the one thing that I feel is that there has to be a way that someone can do the research to find grants that our communities can apply for, but they also need to know what the grants are. What do you have to have as far as matching funds, and how do they come up with those funds, whether it's at the local level or whether the organizations, the community organizations like your business community get together in order to have it so that they will be helping the entire community. I love your presentation, and I am always for local governments getting involved and being heard. And I think that we can plan for everybody, but there are some things that we miss, and only the local people can make sure that it's a part of whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Chairlady Smith?
Thank you again. Yes.
Thank you.
Just don't test us on it, okay?
I promise.
So, some things come to mind. It's almost like you talk about a cosmos out there, and there are all these little particles of funding, but nobody has the ability to compile it to be easily attainable. So maybe that's one area. So I'm supporting what you're saying. We have an agency, Department of Community Affairs, and I'm not aware necessarily what all they do, but that was at one point our go-to place for that. And the seriousness, I cannot express enough the seriousness of the problem in the state with our counties who have declining revenue, declining population, but extreme needs to participate in, and they cannot even file their required annual reports. And so the House did address that problem last year, and needless to say, this is my statement that I'm going to be working hard to see if we can't get a General Assembly vote on that. There's some solutions. We need to keep looking into it. We have great ideas, but we don't have anything to put behind it. And I think if we're to help our state as a whole, it will help us with our counties along the coastal area, because it's the interior just as well that leads to that. But I think we should also just look at some of our established state agencies and maybe give them funds to have the information they have more readily available to you or to your organizations. I find that is an unintentional consequence of what's going on. But yes, it was a great presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, one of the great things about resilience is that it is so complex and really requires that diversity of expertise. I think one of the things that has made Tybee, for example, so successful in their efforts to build resilience is that they've had Alan as a kind of point person. And Alan is out there, marshaling all of the troops and responsible for identifying funding opportunities and going after that fund. Jackie now for the county. I think that has really benefited both of those, both the municipality and the county in their success in these efforts. Just having someone identified, and that will be a real challenge for rural communities. But if there is someone or an office at the state level that could help with that, I think that could be a real benefit.
It's the bucket at the end of the rainbow.
Exactly.
We just got to make it the pot at the end of the rainbow. We just got to make
Exactly.
it accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that's a lot of these things come down to funding. And my dad always said you could do just about anything if you were handy with money, and it's it helps to have that. Speaking of that, one of the slides that you presented that I have commented on a few times throughout this process was we tend to sometimes, for whatever reason, look at the severity of a storm in terms of dollars of damage. I don't know that that's always the right scope to look at it through. But we talk about funding, we talk about money. That's what it's about. And I know that some of these now things cost more, so I don't know if those are adjusted for inflation from
They
the
are.
80s to now. So
Yeah.
those are adjusted for.
They use the consumer price index
Okay.
to
All
adjust
right.
it for inflation.
But just from a standpoint here, with the growth we're having, with things like Hyundai coming, with all of the ancillary businesses that are going to come along with that, with all the development along the coast of infrastructure, and facilities, that's going to lead to there being more dollars of damage, even if storms don't get more severe. Just having storms, there's going to be more things to damage and more people to impact. So it's one reason I think it's even more critical for us to talk about this now. Thank you again. I don't get to ask my question because you'd already put it on here, so I wrote down your suggestions. I appreciate your preparedness and your flair, and thank you again for being here. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, next we are going to have Jake Matthews, Vice President of Government Affairs from the Georgia Forestry Association. No longer with the insurance business.
That's right.
Not that insurance business. It was the Farm Bureau insurance business, not State Farm. You were Jake from Farm Bureau.
Yeah, I worked on a TV deal with them, but just couldn't quite get that.
It's not right. As a Farm Bureau member, I'll talk to somebody and see, figure that out.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah. That's a good point. That is, yeah.
All right. Good deal. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's good to be with you all this morning. I really do appreciate the chance to come and speak to you a little bit. I've also really enjoyed the chance to listen to the presenters here before me. That's some pretty incredible things that are being done in this space, if you will. And so what I'm going to talk about now is just maybe a tad bit different, but still certainly within the realm of resiliency, right? But I will talk a lot about the storm that just recently hit us here in Georgia, of course, Hurricane Helene, and talk about its impacts on the forestry sector here in the state, whether it's timberland owners or all the way throughout the supply chain. So many of you already know this, but Georgia is the #1 forestry state in the nation, and the reason for that really comes down to a number of different things. Mainly these stats that you see here on the screen We're number one in privately owned timberland. We plant the most trees every single year. We harvest the most trees every single year out of any state. Our export side of the industry is very strong. Of course, where we're at right now plays a really important role in that. And, you know, I think another important thing to bring up is that we actually grow. You see the two, stat number 2 and 3 here. We actually grow 43% more trees than we harvest every single year. And I always like to point that out just because it's certainly a sector that is extremely sustainable, and we're continuing to get better every single day as well at that. And then, of course, supports this state in a big way when you look at economic impact, especially to our rural areas, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and a lot of tax revenue as well. So all those things are great, but of course, as with any industry or sector of our economy, we've got a number of different things that I would say are challenges for us right now. The map that you see right here is mill closures, and I'll emphasize closures, around the southeast. What this map is not showing you is some of the recent mill curtailments that have taken place, some of which have been here in Georgia. And so I show this because everything that we're focused on right now has a lot to do with the fact that markets are in a tough place. We're struggling when it comes to markets for wood. And what drives a lot of what you just saw on the previous page about, you know, number one in planting, number one just from a, you know, economic standpoint, a lot of that is driven by having somewhere for that wood to go. That's what incentivizes a landowner to want to continue being in the forestry business, to continue planting trees, growing those trees, managing them in a really sustainable way. So this is a huge challenge for us right now, and I just show it to you because it kind of frames up a lot of the way we think about things, and it frames up a lot of the things we try to address when we are talking with you all when it comes to different policy decisions. I'm going to show this video here real quick. If it's on the video. Here we go.
In our area where we're at, we've always been pretty safe. We've only lost maybe 500-600 acres of fire over the last 30 years. You know, I have fire tractors, bulldozers, forestry right here. We do a lot of burning to keep our fire danger down. So there's things you can do to help that, but as far as a hurricane this strong coming through here, nobody's ever seen it. You lose it. If it's a tornado, wind, flood, fire, we have no protection. Zero. And that's got to change. We need something to protect our forest land and to make us want to keep our forest land.
The landowners are pretty downtrodden, losing the vastness of timber that we've lost, and you know, not quite sure folks will be putting wood back in the timberland, which is a travesty. I hope that we can figure out ways to incentivize and encourage our landowners to replant their timber.
So I wanted to put that video to kind of open up with what I wanted to talk about, which is Hurricane Helene's impact on forestry, especially with our forest landowners all across the state. Out of the probably 36 million acres of actual land mass that our state has, 22 million acres of that is forest land. So it makes up a huge portion of our state. And of course, you can see from the video that I just showed and the pictures I'm going to show here next, it absolutely just decimated acres upon acres of forest land. So the storm actually traversed about 8.9 million acres of forest land, but about 1.5 million of those were probably the most significantly damaged. So you brought up a good point. You know, sometimes we measure damage, and you'll see this in a second, in dollars, and we certainly have, you know, come up with that number, but I think it's important to talk about just how many acres have been impacted by the storm. You can see how some of these trees have fallen different ways, and then it's almost like right here on the left side, it was untouched, and on the right side is decimated. A lot of that has to do with, of course, how far the spacing is in between the trees, and also just the way the storm actually came through different areas. We saw our little bit older pine stands do worse than some of our younger stands, and then you've got, of course, certain stands that are just leaning over. You have some that are completely turned over at the root ball. You have some that are snapped off as well. And so what this means is the clock really started ticking as soon as the storm came through for landowners to start salvage operations. You've probably got about 3 weeks to get wood up if it snapped. You've probably got about 3 to 4 months if it fell over at the root ball. And so again, the clock is ticking, if you will, and there's really just not enough logging crews. There's not enough folks out there to get the wood up to meet the demand that there is right now. And so that's a really, really tough thing. And also, during this time of the year, mills are starting to already build up their supply already. And so the mills are full. There's nowhere to take the wood. And so that kind of goes back into what we were talking about with markets earlier. And so there's a number of landowners that are going to be left with their property like this and nowhere for the wood to go. So that'll certainly add to what they're having to do when it comes to the cleanup and the restoration of that property. The other thing I think I would talk about is the number, so the economic damage number. The Georgia Forestry Commission did a lot of work after the storm to basically assess all the damage and figure out those numbers I was just talking about with acreage. But they also calculated that the total economic losses, right, the value of the timber that actually got damaged was $1.28 billion here in Georgia. So that's extremely significant. It is severe economic loss for folks all across the spectrum of forest land ownership. You've got a very diverse land ownership base in the state, everything from a really small landowner to a larger landowner. You've got folks who are invested in timberland for the long term. It's a very long-term investment that usually takes anywhere from 15, 20, 30 years before you actually realize any sort of gain from that investment. For a lot of folks in Georgia, it's their kids' college fund. It might be part of their 401k or their retirement, and so it's a really, really big deal here in our state and for the citizens of our state in particular. So I put this up here because we talk a lot about being the #1 forestry state in the nation, and we also talk a lot about being the #1 state to do business. And I think the two are certainly tied very closely together. And so when we're looking at some of the ways we respond to the storm, I think forestry certainly should be held in high regard, at least in high focus, and really pay attention to some of the things we can do to help forest landowners, to help the entire really supply chain recover from this. And of course, there's a lot of things that we as an association are working on with engaging with our congressional delegation. If any of you remember Hurricane Michael, which was again a very severe storm, but to put it into perspective, Hurricane Michael, there was about $760 million worth of damage done to timber from Hurricane Michael. And this is $1.28 billion. And so, we thought Hurricane Michael was bad. This is almost double from a damages standpoint when it comes to forestry. And so, like you have mentioned already, and I'm probably going to be a little bit shorter than some of the other folks that have spoken, but I'd rather take questions from y'all. But I'm going to give you two things that we have kind of on our radar from a policy standpoint that we believe would be very beneficial and help in a significant way the forestry sector recover from Hurricane Helene. But also, this first one I'll show you was something we were already focused on anyway, but it's certainly been highlighted even more by the storm. So if y'all recall, back in 2023, the General Assembly passed legislation that increased the allowable gross vehicle weights for commercial trucks hauling ag and forest products. We increased it from a 5% variance on those vehicles to 10%. And what that did is it brought us up a total of 4,000 pounds for those trucks, right? So it wasn't for all commercial vehicles, it was for a tailored set of vehicles, those hauling ag and forest products. We've got some numbers here that kind of show you what that means, basically from an economic standpoint as well as miles traveled standpoint to your average, smaller logging crew. You can see here Toby McDowell, that's actually a GFA member of ours who owns and operates a logging crew, and we worked with him and some others to kind of get some of these numbers. As you probably already know, that piece of legislation has a sunset provision in it, and so July 1st of 2025, it will sunset unless you all, the General Assembly, choose to pass a piece of legislation that would remove that sunset. And so that's a recommendation that we're putting before you. We would ask that that sunset be looked at this session. I know there will be probably a lot of debate and discussion over that, and a lot of looking at data, but we believe this would be a really important thing even prior to the storm. But when the storm hit, I kind of mentioned how salvage operations started right away. And because of the executive orders that were in place at the state level and at the federal level, we were able to receive some temporary relief on the weights and just transportation in general of forest products, but also debris, right? So a lot of that debris, stuff that's on the side of the road, that sort of thing, it's not necessarily going to a forest products mill, right? Some of that is just going to end up as debris, but a lot of this, all the salvage wood that you're seeing in some of these pictures is going to a forest products mill. It's salvage wood, and so probably 15% of what's on the ground is going to end up being salvaged. And I've actually been told that may be a little bit too high of a number, but that's kind of what we're sticking with. We're basing that off of Hurricane Michael. I believe was like 18 or 19% of the wood that was on the ground actually got salvaged, and so a lot of it does end up going unclaimed, right? So this, I'm getting a little off track. The two things I wanted to hit on was at the state level, that executive order allowed us to haul at 95,000 pounds on state roads. And then because of some of the executive orders and emergency declarations that took place out of the White House and out of the federal government, we were able to have a permit put in place through the Department of Public Safety that allowed trucks hauling debris and forest products in response specifically to Hurricane Helene to haul on the interstates at 95,000 pounds. And the reason behind that really was driven by the fact that your state roads and your local roads, a lot of them were covered up. They were covered up with trees, power lines. You had utility folks working to get those roads back up and open. You had folks like DNR and the Georgia Forestry Commission and GDOT out there working to get those roads back open and cleared. And so to be able to have those trucks that were carrying debris and salvage wood get on the interstate, during this time of emergency was really impactful. And so I wanted to put this before y'all as kind of one of those things that we believe would not only help in these situations, but it also just provides more surety and certainty to producers in times that are not related to a disaster as well. The second thing I'm going to put here before you is tied more directly to the storm, I would say. After Hurricane Michael, the General Assembly gavelled in for a special session, and y'all passed House Bill 4EX. And what that was a reforestation tax credit. It was a tradable credit that carried forward 10 years. It was set to be $200 million, and we do know that only 50 million of it was spent. And so 200 million may be, a little high in this case potentially, but we think that we could certainly take a look at this and replicate it in some way for this particular storm. It paid $400 an acre, up to 100% of a landowner's losses. The key part to this is that it was contingent upon reforestation. So you had to go back in, put those trees back in the ground, and that's something we want to make sure happens after the storm, right? I mean, you saw the pictures, you see what the landscape looks like in these areas. Those trees, we've talked a lot, and a lot of the speakers have spoken specifically on resiliency, right? I think one of the things that gets forgotten a lot of the time is that just how much land mass is forest in our state and the benefits that people don't think about every day that come from that, specifically as it relates to land, water, air, wildlife. Those forested acres, not only, you go all the way back to elementary and middle school science, right? What does it do? It sucks up carbon, sucks up CO2, and emits oxygen. And the other thing that it does, it provides a lot of wildlife habitat. And the other thing that it does is it acts as really almost a water filtration system, right? It also acts as something that provides resiliency when it comes to these floods that we've seen in the flood waters. Having those forested acres is certainly going to be better than having non-forested acres, right? Because that helps to mitigate some of the problems we see with that flooding. It helps to provide somewhere for that water to go, quite frankly, rather than it running off and into waterways and then traveling down into the places like we saw here in a lot of the pictures that have already been shown. So I say all that because we want to see these forest landowners that are out there not be, as was mentioned in the video, so downtrodden and dismayed at what's happened that they decide, you know, I don't think this is for me anymore. I'm going to get out of this business. I'm not going to replant these trees. That's what we're trying to prevent. And so we believe something like this replicated in the upcoming session would certainly help landowners go and put trees back in the ground. And so that's something I wanted to put before y'all. But with that, that's all I've got. And I would love to take questions. I wanted to make sure that I kept it relatively brief so I could answer more questions. But just again, thank y'all for the chance to come and present briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. Questions from the committee?
I have a statement.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the data that you have given us. Hopefully we can get a copy of your presentation. The one thing that I've picked up on since I've been in in government, you know, sometimes your tongue gets twisted. You know, I love trees. I think that's the beauty of Georgia. I don't think it's the planters that I know I'm concerned about, but it's the drivers that are transporting those trees from one destination to the other. And having to travel back and forth to Atlanta, you can see them as if they own the highway. And I know those chains are locked down, but you never know what may happen. I think there need to be some legislation because they're not supposed to go in the right lane, the left lane. They're supposed to stay in the right lane. But if two of them in a 3-lane going across come together, and I'm in a smaller car, you feel threatened. And so the owners that are planting these beautiful trees, I think that there need to be some rules, and there probably are, but I think they need to be enforced. There are too many accidents that can happen. I can tell you personally that they push you, to the side, and that's very dangerous. So I think because the bill did pass in the passed in the House and the Senate, I think the main problem was they didn't get the votes from, I know, people like me, was because of the safety of the cars and other vehicles that are going along the highway. How do we address those kinds of issues? What can we do? Because there are officers that are out there, but they know how to track when that officer is going to be ahead of them, and they will slow down.
Absolutely. No, you bring up a great point, and it's something that we've actually been putting a lot of thought into lately, and then also trying to source and dig into the data on safety, right? One of the things that I think would be really, really helpful and that we're trying to obtain right now is what are those safety outcomes? What have the safety outcomes done since implementation of this legislation? And then also, what's it look like over the past 5 years, even prior to that legislation, with us hauling at higher weights through executive orders and whatnot. So really, we've got more than 2 years of data to go on. We've probably got more like 5 years of data to go on. Okay. So you bring up a great point. We're trying to dig into that right now and determine what those safety outcomes look like as a result of it. And then we're also looking at how do we as an association go about partnering with folks like MCCD and others to do host, and we've done this before in the past, I know prior actually to my time at GFA, but hosting things out there actually at a track that are focused on safety, not just road safety, but safety on the logging track, safety on the timber track, but then also road safety for drivers. And so we're looking at ways at how we partner with them to do our part as an association, really, to start to continue improving upon those things. And so, no, you bring up a great point, and it's something we're certainly working on and looking at. So, yeah, thank you.
Chair Smith.
So this is a heavy load, right?
That's right. That's right.
One of your problems in the past has been the debate between the weight of the trucks and on our highways. And I know y'all are looking into that as well. But if I remember correctly, part of the problem for somebody carrying the timber to a pulp mill are all the different roadblocks, so to speak, from county to county to county, and so that you don't have a standard that you operate within. Is that correct? One county will have one kind of enforcement, and then the next county will have something different. If you could speak to a way to, I guess what everybody's asking for is a clear understanding of where the loggers are going to be and where the trucks are going to be. And we had fewer pulp mills, so it's a complex problem, but it is a blessing to our state that we are the #1 state with timber.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of what you may be hitting on has to do with that there is actually a pretty good bit of coordination that does happen in terms of routing of those trucks. And so you'll see in many cases that those crews will work with the county and local law enforcement to determine where they can and can't go, where they should be going, what is the best route. And then, of course, you're having to route around certain bridges that potentially can't hold that weight, and so you have to route around that. And so there's a lot of considerations. You know, it's a lot more complex than people probably think about, actually going in and harvesting a tract of timber and then going back in and replanting it. There's a whole set of, we were talking earlier about BMPs that have to be followed on that actual tract, where, you know, they're taking into account things like stream management zones. I say all this because there's just a lot that goes into it that I don't think as many people realize. And one of those things is that routing of how to get from where you're harvesting to the end destination. And so certainly an important part.
So are most of our loggers residents of Georgia, or are they, are we having loggers come in from neighboring states as well? I mean, is there a problem there of standardization?
I don't know if there's an issue there necessarily. I would say the majority of our loggers are here in the state, live, work in the state. You may see on of course, the borders of our state, places up near South Carolina or Florida, of course, you probably have some folks coming and going across that state line, probably all ending up in a wash in the end, actually, from folks coming here and us going there, right? But I would say the overwhelming majority of folks that are involved in forestry in our state are citizens of the state of Georgia, right?
So also, our Georgia Forestry Association and our Georgia Forestry Commission, I want to applaud you for your research and for your attention to ways to have repurpose and use the wood, like with the mass timber that we have, and the fact that the state of Georgia, I think, is the first state in the nation to have the formula for industries and corporations to take tax credits. So just a shout out to our foresters that you are innovative in trying to get ahead of a lot of what's going on. So I, for one, love the trees.
While y'all are down here, there's actually I think it's the first residential mass timber building in the southeast that was built. Ann Street, maybe. It's a residential mass timber development using cross-laminated timber. And so that's just kind of one of those things we're looking at trying to do to improve markets, right? Mass timber is a bunch of 2x4s glued together, basically. So what does that do? It helps improve markets for dimensional lumber. So I thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you.
May I
Thank you.
ask one question?
Sure.
Chairman.
Sure.
What you just said, where is that being built?
So it's already built actually,
Oh,
and
really?
I will get the information on it to you. Before I leave, I'll make sure you have it.
Yeah.
I think it's Ann Street potentially, and I can't remember the name of who actually developed that property, but it is a residential kind of a apartment, maybe
Yeah.
townhouse style building. That's it.
Is
yeah,
that what it
yeah,
is?
that's it.
Okay.
And so it's
Where's
built
that?
using cross laminated timber, and so it's a bunch of 2x4s glued together to create these large beams, and then the same thing to create these large panels. And it's basically like you come in and put it all together like a bunch of Legos. And so it's pretty neat to see. And I know Chair Lady Smith here had her committee go and tour the 619 Ponce Mass Timber Building in Atlanta, which is over at Ponce City Market. Be happy to take any of y'all over there to see it. It's actually the flagship store now for Pottery Barn, I believe, and it's really cool. It's pretty special building and building material, quite frankly. So
I see a road trip during session, so.
Yeah. I mean, my apartment's right across from Pot City Market, so I'll just go check it out.
it's
And
up and
this
running.
one, the one in Savannah, Representative Westbrook told me it's in my district, so I'll get a chance to go see it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah, that kind of leads to just one question, or I think a question. You mentioned that a lot of the mills now have their stock basically for this season. They're already full, and now we have a lot more trees that are being harvested. And I think you said about 15% maybe of the down trees will be able to be. Do you think that 15%, if that number is correct, that will be able to be milled? Or is that just what they're going to be able to recover in time that don't take into account what might be turned away from the mill because there's no space for it?
That's taking all those factors into account. So, it's taking into account how much can they actually get to a mill because of what they're accepting, because the markets are basically flooded now with wood. And then it also takes into account just the fact that after 3 weeks to 3 months, depending on how the tree fell, it's going to get infected with blue stain and other types of diseases that make it useless, basically, for that application or that purpose. So.
And so, being in the business I'm in, I know several years ago during COVID, we had a large increase in lumber prices. It really drove up housing costs. And at a time now where we're trying to do things to bring down housing costs, this is going to, maybe not immediately, but over the next year or two, it's going to probably really limit the availability or supply of building materials, I would suspect. Is that?
Yeah, we've been trying to think.
I was wondering if y'all had any kind of numbers, if y'all
Yeah.
had forecast anything yet.
We've been trying to think, and I know there's a lot of others that do more of that economic type forecasting work who probably are in the process of doing that right now as well, and we may have some more of that soon. But it's thrown markets out of whack. It really has in the immediate term, and then like you just brought up, it's going to have some effects for sure in the long term, even probably well beyond 12 or 24 months, I would say, just because of the sheer amount of timber that actually was damaged. And so I would say you're definitely going to see some issues long term. A lot of the reason, lumber markets were pretty interesting there for a while, and prices were high, and housing was going crazy. Well, now, of course, you've got a little bit of the opposite. And some of the curtailments that we're seeing actually very close to here, Meldrum, right outside of here, Savannah, actually not too far away, was a large sawmill. And that mill has curtailed recently. And it really has a lot to do with demand for the product that they're producing, lumber. And so demand is down, and it's driving some of that curtailment. And at a time like this, not having that as a place to take those trees is hurting landowners in a big way, just because of that shutdown of that mill. And so you'll continue to see those problems probably. We're working on, again, just mass timber as being one of those things, alongside a number of other products, is what are the new markets that can create some resiliency in times like this, places to take wood. So.
And I appreciate you, the foresight. I am going to try my very best for us. I'm going to leave the Transportation Committee to the truck weights discussion.
Understood.
I don't serve on transportation, so that's one reason.
And I mostly wanted to highlight for y'all that just the logistics behind moving that salvage wood, and so that was a big part of bringing that up as well.
But I do appreciate the reminder about the reforestation tax credit. That's something that we can certainly look at from a resiliency standpoint. In the video, one of the landowners mentioned them needing some help, protection, something like that. Is there any suggestions of things that we could do more immediately, maybe preceding a storm or immediately after a storm, to help minimize some of the effects of this?
I would say so.
I mean, obviously we can't go out there and
Yeah.
block the storm from the
Yeah,
trees.
that's right.
But if there are some suggestions of things that we could do or things we could put in place to help with, mitigating some of the effects of it in the more immediate term.
So those short-term permits that we had, truly to go at higher weights, it moved wood faster. It did. So that was one thing. The other, what he was kind of referencing in that video, really has to do with the fact that there is not some sort of existing program, if you will, or a mechanism by which forest landowners are able to be supported with relief funding, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, right? So there is not, right, timber is not a part of the federal crop insurance program. There is not some sort of existing, the only thing that does exist is called EFRP, Emergency Forest Restoration Program. And that's administered by USDA, FSA, and it does help tremendously in cleanup efforts and reforestation efforts. The program is capped at a certain amount per landowner, but it does help folks, and that is really what folks are focused on right now. And I apologize because I did not mention this, and I should have earlier. Something that was done immediately was, and this got announced, I think Governor Kip announced it probably just a couple weeks ago, that the state shifted $100 million to go towards hurricane relief, and $75 million went towards ag-specific commodities, more of your row crop side, and then $25 million of that went towards forestry. And so the Forestry Commission now has applications open to where you can go and apply for a fuel mitigation cost share. And so you can apply to that, and the commission will come out and do cost share work where they're splitting the cost with you basically to get some of those down trees up that were not able to be salvaged. Because now you've got all this wood on the ground, and that poses really two huge risks. The first is wildfire, because now you've got so much fuel on the ground, and as you continue to go forward, that becomes a huge problem. And then the second is just pests. So you've got pine beetles that they target unhealthy stands of timber. And those pictures of what you saw, that's a pretty good look at what an unhealthy stand looks like, very damaged and stressed stand. And so that's what they're doing with those funds now, is going out and helping landowners who are in probably the most high risk areas for wildfire, folks that are close to maybe more urban areas, get those tracts cleaned up. And so that's something that was done immediately that I think is going to help in a big way. But we're looking at what we can do at the federal level, but also potentially at the state level that can help with that. Just put in place something that, quite frankly, just provides some financial relief to landowners that need it the most to get that. It's probably going to cost, you see $400 an acre right here. That's about what it costs to go reforest a tract normally. Well, if you've got trees on it like that, the picture behind there, you're looking at more like $2,000 an acre to go get it cleaned up, and then on top of that, the actual cost to reforest it. So it's, you go from something that's worth something, has value, that you were, you had a long-term investment in, to now you have to pay significant costs in order to get it cleaned up and put back into forests. And so anything we can do to put something in place that handles that right away without any delay would be very beneficial. So.
Okay. Yeah, and I would assume the faster they can get that cleaned up, the faster they can start the replanting process. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
One final question, please.
Sure.
We have a paper mill here. Is there any way that there could be a cooperation between all of this timber that is there and some kind of agreement? Or I don't even know if they pick the timber up or the people take it over to them, but has anything been given to them receiving it? Maybe some of our local truck, there's the word, truckers could get that and work hand in hand with the paper mills in order to get that cleaned up at an earlier rate, at a cost that may be a little less than what it would cost ordinarily.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've done anything like that.
So as far a lot of what you're going to see out there right now, a lot of that wood is going to that mill that you're talking
Okay.
about. That's a huge market for it right there. That's where a lot of it goes to, and that, like we said earlier, those markets, that's what incentivizes the landowner to want to go out and do what they're doing on their property. But I would say again that mill, but I don't know about that mill in particular, but just generally speaking, there's been so much wood from the storm that's being salvaged that's come online now that they just can't take it all.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you just don't have enough loggers out there to go and get it up. So, but that is where a lot of that wood goes, right there in this area for sure. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank y'all.
That's a good.
All right, and now
See you.
our last presenters.
I've got to slip out to another meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right,
See
thank
y'all.
you for coming by. Lee Ballantyne, and Elizabeth Reynolds with AT&T. And Lee is the FirstNet area manager for AT&T, and Elizabeth, I believe, is the state director for governmental affairs.
Yes,
So,
sir.
all
And
right.
it's officially good afternoon.
I was going to say
Mr.
we
Chairman.
we're close on time. We're kind of right there at it, but we're gonna finish up strong. So
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and really appreciate all the presenters and their presentations. Have learned a lot throughout the morning, and agree wholeheartedly with your comments that this committee and the work that you're doing is even more important now than it was beforehand in the wake of Helene. So Lee is the expert here, but I am going to give just a real high level, set the stage, and then turn it over to him to speak more in depth. AT&T is very much committed to disaster recovery and response. We want our networks to perform well for our customers all the time, and we want to make sure that we get our network back up and running as quickly as possible after a storm, after a man-made disaster, after an emergency event. And so in 1992, we started a program called the AT&T Network Disaster Recovery Team, NDR. We love our networks at AT&T. Love our acronyms at AT&T. And we have over $650 million worth of assets in the NDR program, things like cell-on-wheel vehicles. We call them cows. We have satellites. We have flying cows. We have amphibious vehicles. We have boats. We have a blimp. We have drones. We have tons of generators, you name it, we've got it. These assets are stored in centralized warehouses around the country, and we actually have one of those warehouses here in Georgia, so that these assets are easy to deploy when needed when we're responding to different events. So part of preparedness for disaster is thinking about resiliency and making sure that we're investing in our network on a regular basis to mitigate the impacts. We're talking a lot about that today. Some of the things that we've been doing, I won't touch on all of them, but we've been utilizing AI to map all of our different properties to see what the exact amount of storm surge or flood risk is for our garages, for our central offices, for our retail locations, so we know very specifically when those properties are in danger. We also have fixed generators at all of our key sites. The vast majority of our cell sites around the state do have fixed generators installed. And then, of course, prior to a storm, we'll pre-stage additional generators as needed. When it comes to disaster response, we have three kind of main entities within the organization that are all involved. And Lee is going to talk more in depth about FirstNet. NDR, Network Disaster Recovery, that's the assets, that's the team that's coming on the ground. We also have our Weather Operations Center. So we have meteorologists that are on our team that are providing us with very real, granular weather data to help us make decisions about what the impact's going to be to our network, to our retail operations, to our impacted customers, so we can communicate effectively and make sure that our teams are operating safely as well. We have an internal EOC that we stand up, and there are predetermined points of contact with each business unit that report into the EOC, and it's region specific. So for example, we have a Georgia External Affairs EOC contact, our construction team, our network team, supply chain, et cetera. And then FirstNet also pulls into that EOC as well. We also embed with the state EOC. So we're communicating very closely with GEMA, with the PSC when we're dealing with storms and responding, and communicating with them about what we're doing to pre-stage and bring in supplies. One other thing that I didn't mention as far as our NDR team, and you can see some pictures of it here, is we set up base camps. And so when we're pre-staging, we bring in everything from lodging to laundry to food to chainsaws to fuel, so that we're not draining local resources when we're responding to disasters and events. And these here are pictures from Helene. As we are all well aware, Helene was an incredibly catastrophic storm and hugely impactful in Georgia, but across a 5-state region. We've heard from our friends in the power industry that the impact was unlike anything they'd ever seen on their network. AT&T was not immune. We had a very significant impact to our network. But I can tell you that 1 week after the storm, of our impacted cell sites, 97% of those were back online and running. And I think that speaks to the incredible work that our crews were doing and how they were working as quickly and as safely as possible around the clock in close coordination with the power companies when it was safe for us to go in and restore fiber. One thing, when we spoke to your colleagues in the Senate, that came up and I wanted to address for you was the conversation about generators at cell towers, and the question of, if we know that we're going to lose power, if we have generators at those sites, is that going to help prevent loss of connectivity? And as I said, we do have generators that are fixed, the vast majority of our cell towers. We also pre-stage and bring in generators and fuel, but power is only one piece of the equation. So the other part of it is the fiber transport to those cell towers to loop them in, if you will, into the network. And so even if they have power, if the fiber is damaged, then they're not going to have connectivity. And that's why it's so important that we have these assets that we bring in, like the portable cell towers, so that we are providing connectivity while our crews are working to restore. And that's why what Lee and his team with FirstNet do is also so critical to help implement that while our teams are working to get back up and running. And so I'm going to turn it over to him to speak further. And then, Mr. Chairman, at the end, I do have a recommendation for you, and we'll be happy to take any questions as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Following up with what Elizabeth commented on, if you go to our website right now, AT&T, you'll see these videos and pictures of Georgia and the recovery efforts following Hurricane Helene. So across south and southeast Georgia, where the storm was worse, we deployed a lot of assets. Our teams are out in the field. My team was out in the field partnering and working with the local law enforcement, with we work with, and customers of FirstNet, or GEMA, Georgia State Patrol, and so our partnership with these groups is important. Today we heard a lot about planning, and we just wanted to share that AT&T has AT&T FirstNet has a plan when a disaster happens. And this kind of gives you an example. As the governor changes the response levels for the state, we change internally. And so you can see here, each group, at each level, the groups respond differently. At level 1, we're usually at the EOC with the GEMA to help make decisions. We're at a lot of local EOCs as well. So we'll embed inside the Emergency Response Center to help make better decisions out in the field. So I would like to just take a couple of minutes and tell you what FirstNet is. It's been around for about 8 years, but there is still, it is still new to a lot of folks. And so real quick, if you remember back to 9/11, the country experienced a disaster, and out of that some legislation came out that said, hey, we need to build a network for law enforcement, for public safety across the country. AT&T bid on that RFP, and in 2018 we officially launched FirstNet in Georgia with the governor's signature, and we've been operating ever since. This created the largest public-private partnership that ever existed between the federal government and a private company, and it's been extremely successful. Part of this was deploying spectrum into the market called Band 14, and that's what FirstNet runs on. It allows us to have a network that's more resilient and more dependable during emergencies than any network that has existed before. The two main problems that we were hired to solve was access to the network and interoperability. And so if you think about the first one, access to the network means when there is congestion at a tower, can you make a phone call, right? Can you send a text? Can you communicate on data? And so FirstNet solves that problem. Interoperability is, can the state talk to the city, and the city talk to the county, and to the federal government? And so we've worked diligently over the 8 years to solve these two problems, and I'll give you a few examples in Georgia how we've done that here in the presentation. FirstNet does not throttle your communication, and FirstNet provides priority and preemption on your cellular or wireless device all the time, 24/7, 365. There's no other company or carrier that can provide this type of service for your wireless communication. It's not a consumer network. So when we won this bid, we actually stood up a separate core. Think about a massive rooms full of computers, right? A core network just for public safety. And we put these across the country, and we run two. We run an AT&T core, and we run a FirstNet core. And that's critical and important to responding to law enforcement's needs and to consumers' needs in the state. So how have we done? Over the last 8 years, we have a 6.1 million users. We have over 50% of public safety in the country today and in Georgia have migrated to this platform. We have widespread adoption all up and down the coast here of Georgia and all across the state. We have FirstNet users in every county in the state of Georgia, all 159 counties. What has it meant to the state of Georgia? So if you look on the left, this was our network in 2018. On the right, you can see it today. So it's been a massive investment in growth of towers, especially in the rural parts of the state, that wouldn't have happened without FirstNet, without the funding that's in place. And it's dramatically improved the response time and the ability of law enforcement to help our citizens when there's a disaster. Elizabeth commented on a couple of these. These are the assets that our teams deploy during an emergency. And you can see these are basically vehicles that you can pull up, you can extend an arm and you can create miles of coverage during a disaster. The one that I want to spend the most time on is on the right side. It says compact rapid deployable. This is a really cool piece of equipment. It's pretty small, it's about this big, right? And so you can put these on the back of a truck, and then you can stand these up, turn these on. You can buy these. Georgia State Patrol owns 2 of these. Other counties have been purchasing these. The state of Florida owns about 60 of these. One of the things that they did a couple of years ago, after they were getting hit with so many storms, they said, how can we be more resilient, right? Part of the conversation today. And they purchased these compact rapid deployables and spread them out before a storm comes in. And so they can immediately, within 15 minutes of a storm passing, they can turn these up and they can provide coverage for emergency response. The cavalry's coming, right? We're coming, our teams are coming, but it'll take 4, 5, 6 hours for us to get there after a storm. So this is a pretty cool tool that FirstNet's provided that customers can purchase that allows you to be able to respond in a quicker manner. Satellite communications. So if you think back to what Elizabeth said, there's 2 parts of a cell tower. One is that power, one is that fiber, right? So one of the things we did in the response for Hurricane Helene is that we were able to use satellite at that tower to replace that backhaul, right? We were able to do that a couple times, and that's relatively a new experience for us. But I also wanted to mention this because our worlds are really changing rapidly when it comes to satellite communication. AT&T has partnered with a company called AST Mobile, Public Information. We have satellites that have already been launched. And over the coming year, you're going to be able to start making text messages, phone calls, data over satellite communication from your smartphone. It's pretty cool. Most people don't know that you can actually do it today using a service through Apple. So if you have an iPhone 14, 15, or 16, and you have SOS on your phone, meaning the tower is down, you're stranded, you're in the middle of nowhere. Most people don't know that you can go into the settings and you can turn on the satellite service and you can send text messages over satellite at no cost. Pretty cool feature. Anybody here knew that already?
No,
Yeah, yeah,
just send it to me.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I still have an iPhone 12, so I don't qualify.
Oh, sir, it might be time to upgrade.
What about are you going to connect with other than, I don't have an iPhone.
So other devices are starting to come out with this feature, and you're going to see more and more of it, but it allows you to send a text message from an iPhone to anybody else who has good coverage. But you do have to have
An iPhone.
or a smartphone. There's more smartphones that are coming out with it as well. Rog the dog. So one of the things we do is we try to care for public safety as well. We brought our dog out, took it up to Greenville. I cover Georgia and South Carolina. So after Helene, this dog is something we bring around just as these public safety workers are worn out and tired, 5, 6, 7 days of working. It's just a way we can connect with the mental health part of law enforcement and our response. And shifting gears a little bit to emergency next gen 911. You guys have probably heard a little bit about this. It's an initiative that many states have already adopted. Georgia's considering some adoption around next gen 911. And it's pretty amazing. And up in North Carolina, there was a great example where they credited lives being saved during the storm because of next gen 911. And just to simplify the diagram, if a 911 center is down, it does automatic routing of those calls from one location to another 911 center, where today it's a manual process that takes time. This is something that can do some automatic routing, which obviously if we can respond faster, it helps. Okay, just a couple of real world examples as we're concluding. So in Georgia, we've been impacted by 2 of these. So the school shooting up in Barrow County that happened earlier this year was a crazy incident, but it's consistent with other school shootings that have happened around the country, and it's a predictable experience. Meaning, when that shooting happens, the tower that supports that school gets bogged down instantly with phone calls coming in and coming out. And so FirstNet allows for access to that tower for emergency communication, right? And so luckily the school system, the county, the police, they're all on FirstNet. And they didn't call, right? Because that's the way FirstNet works. They were able to make their calls, they were able to respond, and we actually took care of 22,000 calls in the first hour after the shooting. We can go through and we can see all the users who were on and what agencies were on. And so it was state agencies and counties and cities from all around that came to respond, and they could use their FirstNet device. So there were over 215 first responders who have a personal FirstNet service. So if you're a first responder, you can get it for your personal line, and they were using that tower in order to respond. So it just speaks to the difference that the network has made during disasters. Hurricane Helene, we deployed over 40 assets. Those assets are those cows and those colts that we put out in the field. So over 40 agencies in Georgia contacted us, contacted GEMA, and said, we don't have coverage, we need coverage. And so we deployed these assets out the days and week after the storm hit in order to provide coverage for these agencies. We also provided generators at 911 centers. And since then, we've had over 10 agencies move to the FirstNet platform just because of the response. It's part of our DNA now at AT&T. We're passionate about it. Our teams are involved and active as soon as we can, as soon as the storm passes. And then finally, the Trump rally where there was an assassination attempt. It was one of those examples we don't get to see a lot, like 9/11, where communication was the problem. The feds weren't talking to the county, and the county wasn't talking to the city. And there are some easy resolutions to this. One of them is response for FirstNet. There's a barcode, QR code you can scan. It's a simple application that if downloaded by all the different agencies, they can have interoperability and communication quickly and easily across their devices that they already carry on their hip. It's not expensive. We've had adoption in Georgia and in South Carolina using these with SWAT teams. So with a little planning ahead, there are applications that can help with that communication. And then the second part, you see that radio in the upper right-hand corner? We're doing a lot right now with bridging together radio networks so that you can talk during an emergency or disaster. Shifting to that radio, I won't go into a lot of detail, but now you can use, you guys all see the police officers with a big land mobile radio on their hip. You can now take that radio and you can run that on FirstNet, which is a dramatic change in communication, meaning you can take that radio and go anywhere in the country and you can talk back to Georgia. You can talk anywhere in the state of Georgia or the surrounding counties and cities. And there's no longer these boundaries of radio networks from county to county to county, right? And so this new technology that we've launched just this year, using these radios on our network, is a game changer for us. And that's it. Elizabeth, did you have some conclusions?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Lee. So going to preempt your question on, policy recommendations. And I believe you're going to be hearing from JICA, Georgia Emergency Communications Authority, and the state of North Carolina 911 at your December meeting. And they'll be talking to you more in depth about Next Gen 911, but that would be a recommendation that we would offer to the committee, is to consider moving forward with authorizing JICA to adopt Next Gen 911 for the state. We are a very significant 911 provider in the state of Georgia, just given our footprint. And we also are the Next Gen 911 provider in North Carolina. And our network in Georgia performed well, but we're talking about 1960s technology. We did have some 911 centers that were impacted during Helene. They were not receiving calls, but they weren't getting the full impact of the data that they would normally get. So they were getting calls, but not necessarily the location data right away. In North Carolina, they got everything, even with the disaster that they had, and they'll share much more about that with you. And you're also able to route traffic, as Lee mentioned, to other parts of the state, to communities that aren't impacted. So that's one real thing that we think the state could do that would make a big difference in responding to disasters. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Questions from the committee? Go ahead. Chair Lady Smith.
So on a funding policy level at the state of Georgia, my local government, Coweta, is saying we need, what do they need with 911, the advance? They're trying to get something established all over the state. And that is going to be a debate before our General Assembly for budget costs. So what are we talking, what level is that? Is that just ground level or advanced level?
That's Next Gen 911 that they're talking about. It's this internet-based platform. So today, 911 services, they're paid for is a fee on people's cell phone bills or landline bills. And so the conversation is around, how do you pay for the existing 911 system while upgrading to the next one? So, once you're upgraded, in theory, the fee should cover the new system, but you've got to get to that new system. So I think that's what you're referencing is the cost to upgrade.
And we'll have a lot more discussion about
Yes.
that in December.
Yes.
Right, okay. May I make one? I just
Sure.
remember hearing a presentation in Jackson County about our different counties, and as we found out there were 5 tornadoes, I think, at that time, and the poignant testimony from different areas, they could not communicate with each other. They had no idea where this tornado was going, and it was all immediate. And it was an overwhelming testimony, and amazing that more tragedy didn't happen. But so you're saying do step 1 in our state, which is what our first debate will be. Where are we headed with our debates?
I think we're in the very beginning, and so it's but it's the Next Gen 911. I've heard from several people throughout this, whether ACCG has reached out about it, Director Stallings with GEMA and I've had a conversation about it. That is the one consistent thing I've heard from several different groups is about Next Gen 911 and the immediate impact it could have. So that will be something that we definitely talk about in depth at the next meeting.
Okay,
So
thank you.
yep. Good question. Yeah. Just a couple. I guess questions. You mentioned the agencies moving to FirstNet. Is that for their primary system? That's for their primary communication system?
So primarily that would be, so there's two user groups that qualify for FirstNet. So it would be your fire, police, EMS, 911. Those are your primary users. And then extended primary users are like your other departments that are in your city or your county. They both qualify for FirstNet. There's just two different levels of priority service that they get. So when I say widespread adoption, most of the cities and counties along the coast have moved all of their wireless devices to FirstNet, primary and extended primary, so that they're ready when that storm comes through.
Okay, so this is an all the time system, not just during emergencies. They're moving their radio communications to FirstNet all the time.
So what I was referencing was primarily their smartphones, their data devices in their vehicles.
Okay.
We have a lot of them that use our radio service. The new radio service I talked about with the LMR radio is just launched.
Okay.
We have 2 cities in the state who are using it today, and it's just beginning to take traction.
Yeah, that's that could be really impactful. I think I know the police department I was with years ago, we had a very short range, and our system couldn't communicate with other systems around. We went to an 800 megahertz system at the time, and you couldn't communicate with the next county down. Or we'd have a chase that'd go to Atlanta, and we'd lose radio communications. You couldn't communicate back with the dispatch. So I'm happy to hear that you can use the radios on that. So
we have 200 agencies in Georgia today that use our radio service just over our existing network, not with the new LMR. And so a lot of those will be transitioning to that new platform.
And so their in-car data and their cell phones are through FirstNet.
Yes, sir.
And you said they have push-to-talk capabilities. Is it a special phone you have to?
Your iPhone, your 12 there actually will do it too. So you can download the application on an iPhone, and we also have some dedicated devices that will allow you to use the button and push to talk, and we can bridge that to their old radios. So we do a lot of that.
Very interesting. I miss my old Nextel.
That's where I began. So
yeah, that was a great device for emergency communications. So
yes, sir.
And lastly, this is kind of specific. During the tornadoes we had back in January of 2023, part of my district, a lot of my district was hit pretty hard, but one place in particular, Jasper Memorial Hospital, they are entirely internet based. Their communication is all VoIP. Their internet was down for a while, and Elizabeth was fantastic. And thank you again for she and I talked almost daily, it seemed, for a while, trying to get the hospital back online. But thinking about that and redundancy for them and for some of our hospitals, because they were unable to communicate in or out of the hospital for a couple of weeks. When the internet went down. So I don't know if something like that compact, rapid, deployable, or the flying cow I really would like to see one of these flying cows.
We'd love to have a field trip to the warehouse.
I'm there. I'm all for that.
So it's a great point. So the compact rapid deployable is really interesting. We have agencies that just buy it for your scenario. So you could put it outside of a hospital, point the satellite, dish at the satellite, and plug up their Ethernet cable to run their 911 center, to run their critical infrastructure within the hospital. So absolutely. If there's something that you guys could do to impact the state, would be to consider what Florida did. They purchased 50 of these for the state, and they could put it at that hospital, and they could turn it on immediately. It uses the Starlink in order to communicate back, and it's an immediate response. $5 million, you could buy 50 of these, and deploy them immediately in the state. Like I said, that would be the first 5 or 6 hours until we can get there with our additional assets.
Just takes a little money.
So, like I said, you can do a whole lot of things if you got money. Okay, thank y'all very much for the information. That's very informative. And if there's no more questions, we'll get wrapped up. We're just a little past where, not too bad though. So we started a few minutes later. But we are going to get ready for our lunch break, and then after lunch we will load on the shuttle bus We were looking at approximately 1. It may be pushed back, maybe 1:15. I'm try to maybe get through lunch a little bit quicker than otherwise noted. But do the Tybee Island visit. Everyone's welcome to attend. Some may have to follow in personal vehicles. We're limited on the shuttle bus who all can ride there, but everybody is welcome. And as we wrap up the testimony portion of the meeting today, I just want to thank everybody again for coming. And any final comments or closing thoughts or remarks from either of my committee members here, I would love to hear them.
First of all, I think it was an amazing morning, and I've learned a lot. I just keep thinking of one word, money, and we've solved all our problems.
Yeah.
Also, thank you. First, again, thank you for coming to Savannah. But thank you. I share my colleagues' concern about the cost, but it's something that's very interesting. I really like that combat, deployable thing. Mm-hmm. That's unique. It looks unique, but what it can do will really help communities, and particularly in the larger and the smaller areas. They would not have to have as many as what would do for a major city.
Yeah, well, and you're just thinking about the last comment, Lee, that you made. There you are. Just the last comment you made about maybe the state. I guess Florida invested in 50 or 60 of those.
Can move them around.
$5 million. So these would be what, 100,000 apiece. Mm-hmm. And look, $5 million is not an insignificant amount of money. But when you're talking about the amount of money that we spend on the state level and some of the things that we do for emergencies, I think that's a real viable option to have. 50 of these that you could set up in a community that can cover a pretty good area and really help. Because I think one of the biggest challenges that we had is communication. It's just when you're trying to recover, the most important thing you can do is to be able to communicate with outside and get the resources in that you need. And so that would be a great asset. But I think today we talked a lot more about resiliency. We did talk about some mitigation first, but resiliency is important. And I'm glad we were able to have the discussion about maybe how to get some of that prepared up front and do a little better planning. So again, thank y'all all for your input and for attending. And with that, we will conclude the morning portion of the meeting and get ready for the field trip. Thank y'all.
That was so interesting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good meeting.
Yeah, thank y'all.
Yeah, very good meeting.